Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mr. Scratch. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Now let's start the story. The sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when I stepped out of my truck onto the dew-slick pavement of Pineway Road. A low, rolling fog clung to the hemlocks and Norway pines, weaving through their trunks like restless spirits. My boots pressed down on wet leaves, sending a faint squeak through the hush of dawn. I tightened my fleece jacket against the chill. April mornings in Clearwater Pines could still bite, and lifted my headlamp to illuminate the narrow trailhead sign, East Fork Loop Trail, Ranger Marquez Zone. I exhaled, watching my breath mingle with the mist. As a park ranger, I patrolled this loop every season for 5 years. I knew every gnarled root, every mossy boulder, every patch of slippery cedar needles. But this morning felt different. The birds were silent, no jays chattering, no woodpeckers drumming on pine. Only a faint rustle suggested something stirred beyond the veil of fog. I shook my head, unclipped my radio, and keyed the mic. Dispatch, Ranger Marquez checking in. Starting East Fork Patrol at 5:28 a.m. Nothing to report yet. Over. A crackle, then the dispatcher's steady voice. Copy that, Marquez. We have a missing hiker report from last night. Solo hiker, last seen at Greenwood Ridge Fire Tower. Please check the ridge and report any clues. Over. I closed my eyes for a beat, steadying my nerves. Greenwood Ridge was 2 miles north of the loop, one of the highest elevations in the park. Fire Tower there provided sweeping views, but on foggy mornings it could feel like entering a cloud cavern. The missing hiker, 23-year-old college student, checked in with friends via text around 9 p.m. last night, saying she'd camped near the tower to photograph sunrise. By midnight, no further signal. This was not her first solo trip. Friends said she was experienced. Yet the last cell pings placed her in the loop between my beats. My instructions: search the loop thoroughly, then advance to Greenwood Ridge. I exhaled, keyed off the radio, and slipped it into my pack. I clicked on my headlamp's red beam to avoid startling wildlife, then turned onto the narrow dirt path. The canopy overhead was a tangle of branches, new needles butting against last year's brittle tips. I brushed past ferns and saplings, careful not to disturb the delicate trilliums. My first stop was an old wooden bridge crossing the East Fork stream. Ran low this time of year. I knelt at its rail, cupped a hand under the trickle. 30 degrees, just above freezing. Not enough to raise immediate concern for hypothermia on the hiker's part, but cold enough to stress someone camping unprepared. I rose, glancing upstream. Sunlight was still threading through the fog, painting the swirling mist silver. I could see footprints, fresh boot imprints, in the mud along the bank. 2 distinct prints, one mid-sized men's hiking boot, one smaller women's. The missing hiker was female, but whose were the men's? I tapped the footprint rim with a gloved finger. The mud still held moisture. These prints were less than 12 hours old. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, tagged GPS coordinates, then followed the prints north, leading off trail into thick undergrowth. My pulse quickened. I stopped for a moment, scanning the trees. Flood control. No off-trail excursions unless urgent. I murmured to myself, but these tracks were too fresh. They might lead to someone injured. I jogged over loose roots, waving branches off my jacket. The footprints vanished at a small clearing where a tent had been pitched. Nylon fragments, shreds of blue and orange, littered the forest floor, snagged on low branches. A twisted metal tent pole lay snapped in half. My breath caught. Clearly a campsite had existed here. I flicked on my flashlight, swept the ground, an empty can of freeze-dried stew, a crushed plastic water bottle. No personal items, no wallet, no backpack. Whoever had been here left in a hurry. I knelt beside a half-consumed package of protein bars. Teeth marks, but no empty wrapper. Strange. I slid a gloved finger along the aluminum foil, drawing out a bit of crumpled trash, a small sticker with a logo pile and Finn Outdoor Supply. I snapped that into evidence bag number 03. Then I scanned for tracks. Fresh footprints circled the clearing, 8 prints in total, half as though someone had paced or circled. None led out, as if the shoes had been removed or someone floated away. I felt a sudden cold prickle along my spine. Rationally, the forest floor simply got heavy dew, and the paces brought heat that dissipated. But instinct whispered of something hidden, something coaxing prints into a spiral. I rose slowly, keeping my flashlight beam low to avoid shining into any shadows. The mist shifted. I thought I saw dark shapes perched on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. In that instant, the shapes vanished as though they had been illusions. No squirrels, no birds, just emptiness. I tapped my radio. Dispatch, Ranger Marquez. I'm at an abandoned campsite on unmarked ground, halfway between Bridge 4 and Greenwood Ridge. There are strange patterns in the prints, circle patterns like pacing. No gear visible. Tent pole snapped. Nothing obviously belonging to missing hiker. I'm still checking the area. Over. Static. No response. I clicked the mic again. Still nothing. Must be a repeater dead zone near East Forks Ravine. I slipped the radio back into my pack and advanced northward, marking the campsite location on my internal map. The trail forked at a fallen cedar, covered in demonic spirals of moss. I paused, took out my paper map. East Fork Loop circled westward. The path to Greenwood Ridge was a steep climb due north. My boots knelt through a carpet of pine needles as I angled toward the ridge. The incline began gentle, rocky tread, about a 10% grade. By the time I reached halfway to the fire tower, the slope steepened, granite outcroppings slick with moss. I switched off my headlamp. Enough daylight filtered through the canopy, and switched to my wide-beam flashlight. Footing was critical. One slip could send me tumbling 20 feet down into scree. I slogged upward, pausing to note 6 fallen trees across the trail, each more massive than the last, testimony to last season's winter storms. The flashlight's beams scoured the roots and branches, twisted hemlock, uprooted larch, a toppled Douglas fir. Moss clung to every fracture, hiding the wood's floor's natural traps. I thought briefly of the missing hiker's text from last night. Camp near tower. Perfect moonlight, will shoot time lapse. She had posted that around 9 p.m. By midnight, no further pings. So whatever happened had to be in that 8-hour window. Did she slip? Get lost in the fog? Or was something else at work? I shook off the question, determined to keep moving. At 6:12 a.m., I reached the old fire tower base, a square concrete pad half buried in fallen needles and pine cones. Rust had consumed the ladder rungs. Graffiti covered its walls. Emerald forest haunts scrawled over a date, 03. The tower's cab was collapsed, sagging inward like a broken jaw. No sign of the missing hiker's tent, no glint of camera gear. If the hiker had arrived last night, she likely pitched her tent somewhere nearby, and daylight should reveal it. I swept my flashlight in a full circle. The forest around me was eerily silent. The usual morning chorus of warblers and thrushes had vanished. Only the rhythmic drip of condensation landing on rocks broke the quiet. The fog had thickened, draping the ridge like an ethereal veil. Visibility was down to 15 feet. I moved toward what remained of the battlement's stone foundation, still intact around 3 sides. I could see boot prints in the saturated soil, one set feminine, size 8 women's hiker, one set masculine, size 10 men's, and a third set children's size 4, overlapping both. 3 individuals, but the report said solo hiker. Photo IDs placed only one person there. The prints led west, toward a break in the ridge's tree line that descended into the gullies below. I crouched, followed them to a small rock overhang, where the prints stopped abruptly, as though the boots had been removed. The soil beneath the rock was churned, covered in smears of dark mud. The shape of a small fluorescent orange camera strap lay in the muck. No camera attached. My heart pounding, I recognized the strap pattern. This was her camera brand, a mid-tier Nikon designed for astrophotography. She wanted to capture the sunrise from that vantage point. Now the camera strap lay abandoned, lens missing. I clicked a photo, then searched my pack for latex gloves. Slipped them on, stuffed the strap into an evidence bag. Then I checked my forearms. My sleeves were torn in multiple places, as though I'd brushed thorns. But I hadn't. A hollow dread settled in my chest. This place had changed. Something had visited here after midnight, something strong enough to tear the fabric of her tent, her gear, perhaps even her fate. I tapped my radio, dispatch Marquez. Found prints from 3 individuals at Greenwood Ridge, 2 adult, 1 child's. Camera strap, female hikers, recovered. No sign of bodies. I'm going to follow the prints deeper into the gulch. Request backup. Over. Static. Again. I slanted my flashlight beam toward the western break, a gully carved by centuries of erosion, lined with slick, dark rock. A trickle of runoff water descended, feeding into the east fork far below. My only option was to descend. I slid off the ridge's shattered foundation and stepped into the gully. The damp air was colder here, like stepping into a freezer. Each footfall dislodged clods of loose shale, sending miniature rock slides echoing down to the creek below. My flashlight traced the rock walls, slick schist layering, crisscrossed with moss. Every 10 feet, A small alcove or crevice yawned like a mouth. I thought of the missing hiker, alone in the gloom, shivering, dazed, perhaps injured. Or worse. I paused at a damp alcove half shielded from the main channel. Something glinted in the darkness, a child-sized hiking boot, laced but untouched. My hands trembled as I scooped it up. The boot's tag read Everlast Trails, a size 4. The sole was clean from post-resin waterproofing, no fresh mud, but inside, I found a scrap of candy wrapper and leaf litter. No sock, no foot. I stepped backward, heart pounding. How did a single boot get here? Alone? Unless someone or something removed the other shoe, discarded it, and moved on. I covered my mouth to control my breathing, then taped the boot for evidence. I pressed forward along the channel. The wall's water runoff thickened, tiny waterfalls cascading into mossy puddles. I could hear rustling in the undergrowth above, leaves scraping a soft, rhythmic tap, like someone drumming a message into bark. It echoed in my head, "Look away. Stay away." I froze, raised my flashlight. The beam caught two eyes, small, reflective, masked at a broken tree trunk. I swung the light, nothing. The eyes vanished. I exhaled slowly. "Damn wildlife," I muttered. Then a whispered voice, soft, close to my ear, but no one was there. "Go home." The words hissed like steam. I spun around. No one. I raised my radio dispatch, but my throat went dry. The forest swallowed the sound. A low, rasping groan emanated from upstream. A child's cry? Or something mimicking one. It built into a keening wail that rumbled through my bones. My headlamp flickered. For a fraction of a second, the gully was illuminated in bright red light, like a floodlight revealing a scene of carnage. I saw shapes, 3 silhouettes hunched, faces blurred, standing on a ledge 10 feet above. Then darkness resumed. As quick as it came, the red light dimmed, replaced by black gloom. I staggered back, fumbling for my flare gun. Its weight was a comfort in my gloved palm. I fired a red flare upstream. The rocket hissed skyward, then burst into a red bloom that cast flickering light across the walls. I saw the silhouettes again, 3 figures, featureless shadows, but hunched with unnatural gait. No context. The flare sputtered out. Darkness reclaimed the gully. I blasted a second flare in a high arc, more cautious this time, so the bloom lingered longer. Crimson light spilled over the ravine. I spotted claw marks etched into the walls. Deep gashes gouged 5 feet high, like jagged teeth tore through stone. I swallowed hard and jammed another flare into the chamber. Before I could fire, the shapes ducked behind rocks, vanishing entirely. Silence swallowed. My breath hitched. The flare's red glow faded. I scanned with my flashlight. Nothing, only slick stones and dripping overhead. I backed out of the alcove slowly, slipping on a wet ledge. My elbow slipped. I crashed forward into the rubble. Pain exploded along my right wrist where I hit a jagged rock. I hissed, taste of copper in my mouth. I pressed my flashlight to the wound. Bone was visible through torn fabric. I swallowed bile. If it were broken, I'd be useless beyond this point. I dragged myself upright, checked my radio again. Nothing. The dead zone. I had two options: ascend back to the ridge or pursue the shapes further upstream. The first felt more prudent. Get out, call for backup, return with a team. But something inside me refused to retreat. I needed to know what happened to that child's boot. I swallowed, gritting teeth, and limped forward, pushing deeper into the gully. The dripping overhead intensified, slightly warmer water sliding off stone. The rattling drone of distant water echoed. Soon, the gully opened into a shallow basin, mottled rock floor, dark as charcoal, smeared with someone's dried footprints, barefoot prints small and splayed. They circled the basin twice, then disappeared under a pile of shale at the far edge. I approached cautiously, raising my flashlight. Under the rubble, I saw a child's backpack, green nylon designed for ages 6 to 10, zipped shut. I knelt, unzipped it empty. No water bottle, no snacks, no jacket, nothing. A chill coiled in my stomach. I snapped a photo of the basin's floor, 8 concentric prints in dried, cracked mud, then pressed my palm to the rock, cold, as though it had radiated chill all along, watering out my sweat. A gust of wind howled through the basin, shivering in my bones. I leapt back as a clattering noise clattered overhead, loose rocks tumbling from the ledge above. My flashlight revealed a figure perched on the rock shelf, thin, elongated limbs, ragged fabrics hanging from its shoulders. In the dim beam, I saw its face. The child's skull stretched over 2 narrow jaws, eyes empty hollows reflecting my light. Its arms extended toward me as though greeting an old friend. I yanked my flare gun, fired at the figure's chest. The flare ignited a small burst of flame that splashed onto the creature's torso, sparks of red fire blossoming. It screamed, high-pitched, ear-splitting. Then it vanished, as though sucked into the shimmer of the walls. I slammed into the rocks and scrambled backward, bridling every nerve. The wail echoed, then ceased. The basin was cold once more, silent. I realized with a shock that my flashlight had swung away from the scene. Now only the red embers of the spent flare smoldered at my feet. I rose slowly, lit my flashlight again. No sign of the creature. No sign of the child. Only the backpack, the basin, and that thong of adult dread. I retreated from the basin, stumbling along the boulders. My wrist burned with each step. Sweat and blood dripped onto the rock. I reached for my radio again. Finally, crushed reed static. No bars. I had to get out on my own. I hauled myself up the gully wall, footing uncertain, until I emerged near the ridge's base. The red glow of dawn peeked over the horizon. Birds began calling again, as though nothing had happened. I stumbled to the ridge's foundation, slid down the steep grass slope, and rejoined the East Fork Loop Trail at first light. By the time I limped back to the ranger station, bleary-eyed, muddy, bleeding, dispatch had received a call from a hiker reporting footprints near Loop Marker 8. They'd send a fast response unit. As I pressed my palm to my dripping wrist, Ranger Norton, our on-shift medic, peered at me with concern. "Marquez?" Jesus, what happened? She applied antiseptic to the cut. You look like you wrestled with a pine grizzly. I gripped the table edge. Worse, forced down bile. There were footprints, abandoned gear, something in the gully, something that looks like a child but isn't. I exhaled. I shot a flare at it. It vanished into thin air. Norton's expression flickered between concern and disbelief. You need stitches. We'll get you to the clinic. But can you tell me exactly where this happened? I'll send coordinates to search teams. I nodded, trying to clear my head. Below Greenwood Ridge, in a rock basin. I'll mark it on your map. I reached into my pack for my GPS and map, wincing as pain shot through my wrist. Inside the clinic tent, Dr. Franklin sutured the laceration. I stared at the sterile walls. My wrist ached, but my mind felt hollow. I tried to describe the figure, a child's form, but twisted. Yet every time I uttered the words, my throat closed. Pain or disbelief? I wasn't sure which. Marquez, we've got local EMTs en route to that basin site, Dr. Franklin said. As soon as you're patched up, you'll supervise the perimeter. No one goes in alone. I nodded. Understood. He finished tying the last knot. Be careful out there. If you need air support, call it in. Don't push yourself. I exhaled, masking exhaustion. I'll be all right. That night, I volunteered for the dusk to midnight shift. My senses felt taut, as though the forest had leaned into something unnatural. We set up a semi-permanent field station at the loop junction, a folding table with maps, battery packs, two-way radios, and a pair of motion sensor cameras aimed down the trail toward Greenwood Ridge. Norton and Ranger Patel took the dusk hours. I was on from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., the peak time for odd phenomena. My kit included a headlamp with red and white beams, extra batteries, my shotgun loaded with beanbag rounds, my flare gun with 5 red flares, pepper spray, the radio, and a small first aid kit. I also carried a handheld thermal imager, standard for nighttime patrols. The night chill bit through my shirt. Every breath felt like inhaling needles. I sat on a low stump, scanning the loop junction, the trees, the path, the faint trail to the gully. The motion cameras blinked green. At 10:32 p.m., Norton buzzed on the radio. Marquez, we got hikers in Sector Beta. Might be lost. Says they saw lights in the ridge. Copy, I replied. I'll stand by. I watched the hiker's thermal signature flicker on my imager. 2 adult forms, 1 child, walking slowly up the loop from the south. The child's heat signature was weaker. Could be a trick of the sensor and humidity, but I frowned. The missing hiker? No, she was 19, but this child could be 70 pounds, too large for a toddler. I clicked on white beam flashlight and flicked it in their direction. They halted, looked up at my position. I waved, beckoning them. They descended, visible now as a man, a woman, and a boy no more than 6 or 7. They were bundled in bright camping gear, rain jackets and packs. Buying suspicion, I descended the slight slope to meet them. Evening, I called voice low. Ranger Marquez. They slid off the trail. The woman held the child close. The man held a lantern. "Ranger," the man said, "we got separated. Thought we'd follow a set of lights by Greenwood Ridge, and we ended up circling. My wife slipped, sprained her ankle. This is our son, Tyler. We were trying to find help." I crouched to examine the woman's ankle, twisted at the angle of an acute sprain, already swelling, tender to the touch. She winced as I prodded. "I'll help you down. Where did you see lights?" She swallowed. "On the ridge, barely visible through fog, like someone's phone or flashlight, but it kept moving." I nodded. "You're near a known hazard zone. We've had strange reports, broken gear, odd lights, people who wander off and don't return. You're lucky we found you. I'll guide you to the trailhead, then I need you to wait for EMTs." She nodded, eyes wide. Tyler clung to her leg. He stared up at me with blank, unblinking eyes, too calm for a child in the dark, near a sprained ankle. I shivered. The man slipped his hand around his wife's shoulder as I guided them off the trail. I set a waypoint on my GPS at 10:45 p.m. and made sure they followed me safely back to the loop junction. As soon as they vanished down the southern trail, I headed back to my stump. At 11:05 p.m., I checked the motion cameras. No triggers on the loop, clear. But the sensor aimed at the gully site recorded intermittent movement, bright temperature spikes around the basin area, as if something was pacing. I watched the playback. 5 minutes ago, a small humanoid figure, child-sized, stepped into frame, loitered, then vanished. The timestamp read 10:58 p.m. My pulse quickened. I jammed a fresh magazine into my shotgun, slung it across my chest, and pocketed a flare. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Marcus. Basin sensor triggered. Possible person or entity. I'm heading up." Over. Silence. I clicked off my radio, eyes wide. I felt as though I'd opened a door into an abyss. The gully's reputation soared in my mind. Tonight, it called again. The trail to Greenwood Ridge was narrower at night. My headlamp cut a pale circle through the trees. I trekked uphill, muscles burning from the steep gradient, body tensing at every snap of a twig. By the time I reached the basalt overhang that marked the entrance to the basin, I was out of breath. A cold whiff of damp earth washed through me, like the world itself exhaling. I raised my flashlight, scanning the black depths. Nothing. My thermal imager showed only ambient readings a few degrees above freezing. But I heard it again, a faint humming like breath on metal. I slipped a hand into my pack for the audio recorder, hit record. The screen lit up, decibel meter flickering. I took a breath, then stepped into the basin. The circling prints from earlier had faded under the dripping moisture of the rock, replaced by fresh tracks, tiny bare footprints, roughly the same size as the child's print, now oriented toward the upper ledge. I froze, heart hammering. My flashlight caught a flash of movement. A pale form crouched on the far ledge, half shrouded in shadow. Even from this distance, I could see its face. Hollow eyes, mouth split too wide into a grin. It cocked its head at me, then darted out of sight. I shouted, "Here, show yourself." My voice echoed off the walls, doubled, distorted. No response, only a low hum that vibrated my stomach. Then a quiet whisper in my ear, so close it made my hairs stand on end. Away. I whipped around. Nothing. My radio chirped from my belt. Ranger Patel to dispatch. We've got 3 hikers at loop marker, 12 reports of groaning voices near the creek. Suspected intoxication. ETA 2 minutes to your location for backup. My relief warred with fear. I tapped out a reply, then headed deeper into the basin. My boots struck a pile of rubble that concealed what once was a triangular opening, a tunnel carved into the rock. The survey rangers had marked this as basin caves, unstable, no entry, but now it gaped at me like a mouth inviting me in. I swallowed, remembering the missing hiker's nylon shreds and the child's boot. This was where I had to go next. I leaned into the mouth of the tunnel. The flashlight's beam diminished quickly, fading to a pinprick in the advancing darkness. I took out my pepper spray, gripped the handle, and took a steady breath. And I murmured, pressing forward. The entrance collapsed behind a low pile of broken shale that I had to squeeze past. Inside, the air was muggy, thick with the scent of earth and something acrid, like burnt hair. The walls felt damp to my touch, cold, clammy stone. My flashlight's beam revealed a rough-hewn corridor, leaning downward at a 30-degree angle. The ceiling was low, 3 feet at most, forcing me to crouch. The passage narrowed after 20 feet, then down to a crawl space. I hesitated. My senses screamed not to go further, but I could not leave the missing hiker's fate unexamined. I squeezed through the tightest bottleneck and emerged into a small cavern, perhaps 15 feet across. My beam swept around, walls streaked with dark ichor, thick and sticky, dripping in sticky rivulets. The floor was littered with bones, small birds, raccoons, deer, jagged shards of rib and skull poking through a slick of dried fluid. Some bones had odd whitish tendrils of what looked like fungus, delicate web-like strands weaving across the remains. My stomach turned. In the center of the cavern stood a crude altar of stacked stones, smeared in fresh ichor that glistened in the flashlight. Atop the highest stone sat a worn camera lens, shattered glass, captured in a halo of red droplets. It belonged to the missing hiker's Nikon. My breath caught. I approached, stepping carefully to avoid the bones. With gloved hands, I picked up the lens, its metal rim slick with viscous black fluid. A sudden rustling caused me to spin, but there was nothing, just the narrow tunnel I'd entered. I noticed something at the far wall, jagged scratches etched into the stone. I approached, kneeling to inspect them. They formed a spiral of tally marks, 8 sets of vertical lines enclosed by 2 diagonal strokes, like 12. Beneath them was a series of tiny footprints in caked mud, bare feet, 5 on each side. A child's print, no larger than a dollar coin. Each print had an odd swirl pattern embedded in the center, as though something shaped the mud by design. Above the swirl, a single word was carved, watch. Below it, another single word, listen. I shivered, shutting off the beam. My flashlight died. Batteries finally drained. I tapped the side. No response. I fumbled in my pack for extra batteries, but found none. I needed to rely on my headlamp, and I clicked its red beam on. The red light wasn't enough to illuminate details. The cavern fell into deeper gloom. I raised my headlamp, but aside from the altar and the scratched spiral, nothing moved, until I heard it, a soft scuffing at the tunnel's entrance. My headlamp's narrow beam caught something darting at the edge of light, a small childlike form slipping back into the darkness. I chased its shadow with my beam, but it vanished. I exhaled a shaky breath. My radio crackled, momentarily startling me. Marquez? Marquez, you there? Dispatch. Please respond. Over. I snapped to, pressing the mic. Dispatch here. Found an underground cavern near Greenwood Ridge. Missing hiker's camera lens on an altar of stones. Bones, something's eating wildlife, leaving ichor. Need extraction. Over. Static. No reply. The radio went dead. I pounded at it before realizing the batteries had died too. Both my primary communications devices were useless. My heart hammered. I was trapped, alone underground, wounded, with night closing in. I knelt beside the altar, grabbed the lens, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. If I didn't make it back, this would be crucial evidence. I scanned the cavern for any exit. None. The tunnel I came through was the only way out. The walls around me seemed to pulse, as though the very rocks were alive. A low humming built, as faint as a heartbeat, but building in rhythm. My head throbbed with the sound. Suddenly, a glimmer of movement, two eyes shining in headlamp's red light. Perched atop the altar, another small childlike figure, cloaked in dripping ichor. The figure raised a hand, pale and slender, pointing at me. The words scratched on the cavern wall crept into my mind. Watch. Listen. I felt an urge to obey, to watch it, to listen to its message. Fear rasped my spine. I forced my lungs to work. Back off, I hissed. The words seemed to echo in the hollow space. The figure tilted its head, unblinking gaze burning into me. It opened its mouth, black icer dripping from twisted, serrated teeth, and emitted a low chant. He'd. Its voice was layered, echoing beyond the cavern like a chorus of whispers. The pressure in my skull spiked. I slammed my palms over my ears and dropped to my knees, fighting the urge to follow its chant. My vision blurred, sweat ran down my face. I struggled to stand, shaking. I raised my headlamp in a defensive arc. The figure vanished along with the chanting. A moment of silence so profound it felt like collapse. I caught my breath, trembling. I stood, stumbled toward the tunnel. My headlamp cut through the gloom. I slung the missing hiker's lens higher into my jacket. One thing I knew, I could not stay here. Whatever lived underground wanted me to listen, cast a spell with its chant, and I refused to give in. I started forward, stepping over bones, ignoring the tremor in my legs. I crawled through the narrow crawl space leading back to the gully's basin. My headlamp's red light flickered over rock walls, revealing wet stamps of ichor. The tunnel felt alive. I could hear water dripping, feel a low hum in the stones beneath my knees. When I emerged into the open basin, the moon had broken through the clouds, casting pale silver onto the wet stones. The bones were gone, only damp patches where they might have been. I pressed onward, following the path of collapsed shale to the bank where I'd entered. I lost my footing near the entrance, slipped, and tumbled several feet down the rocky slope before catching a jagged root that snagged my forearm. Fresh pain shot through my wrist. New lacerations streaked with ichor. I gasped, tasting it on my tongue. I staggered to my feet, rising slowly, as though waking from a nightmare. The forest beyond the basin was unnaturally still, as though the trees exhaled for the first time. My flashlight revealed only a narrow path of broken undergrowth leading to the ridge. I thought I saw shapes, shadows flitting high in the canopy, but dismissed them as deer or squirrels disturbed by my passage. It was better to believe in something natural than to consider darker possibilities. I scrambled up the steep incline. Each step my wrist threatened to buckle. My headlamp beacon punched ahead, illuminating rocks slick with moss. Finally, I reached the stone foundation of Greenwood Ridge's fire tower. The sky above was clear, stars blinking in. No moonlight to guide me along the forest trail. I switched my headlamp to white beam. The incline to the East Fork loop was faintly visible. I slid down on my haunches, gripping roots to keep balance, until I reached the trail junction. I froze as I heard a faint call behind me. I spun my headlamp. Two ravens sat on a bent pine branch, watching me. They tilted their heads in unison, black feathers absorbing the light. My skin pricked. Ravens should have flown south for the season, not this late. And they waited, as though studying me, before one launched itself from the branch, wings slicing the air in a hard beat. It let out a gurgling caw. I shivered and whispered, "Go on," but the second raven remained, staring. I spun away, sprinted down the trail, heading south toward East Fork. Behind me, I heard one final call, low and deliberate, like an invitation. I limped into the ranger station at 2:13 a.m., mud-caked boots, headlamp's red beam flickering, wrist throbbing. Norton and Ranger Patel were waiting outside, headlamps shining into my eyes. Once I hit the fluorescent lights of the station, they looked positively alarmed. "Marcus, where the hell have you been?" Norton exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "Your watch ended at midnight." I swallowed, shaking. Went to check the basin. I found the hiker's lens on an altar, bones, that cavern. I forced my breath calm. Something down there, something took that child. Left only bones. I don't know what it wants. Patel's face twisted. "I've been monitoring the perimeter cameras. No anomalies on the motion sensors. We did a broad sweep. No signs of a cavern. There's no way a tunnel would exist under Greenwood Ridge, Marquez. Everything's rock. How could—" He trailed off, staring at my blood-soaked jacket. I shook my head, tears pricking. "I'm not insane. I saw it. I replayed the cavern's altar, the spiral print, the chanting. I have to return with equipment. Get a structural assessment." Norton pressed a towel to my wrist. "First things first, your wrist needs x-rays. You're dehydrated. Risk infection." The EMTs are here. They'll hook you up 2 and 4. We're calling extraction at dawn. No more solo excursions. I exhaled, shoulders sagging. I understand. Norton guided me to the table. I lay down as she said in 4. Pain sliced through my wrist. Patel turned from the window, where his laptop glowed. You should see this, he whispered, drawing us both over. On screen was the thermal feed from the motion cameras aimed at Greenwood Ridge. At 12:27 a.m., a column of heat rose from the ridge, pulsating upward before vanishing at 12:29 a.m. Then, at exactly 1:02 a.m., the column returned, stronger, wider, and moved north along the ridge, skirting the gully's edge, before disappearing at 1:05 a.m. I stared. Like a spirit drifting? Patel shook his head. We tracked it on 3 channels: thermal, low-frequency audio, and seismic tremors. The earth actually moved slightly, like something heavy passing underground. Then the ground folded inward, closed over itself. You couldn't dig. The ground resealed. My chest tightened. Every rational cell told me to wake from a nightmare. But I'd felt the heat underfoot, heard the hum, seen the shapes. I looked at Patel. You saw a cone of heat, a pulse of energy, then nothing. He nodded. Yup. The recorded audio feed from 1:02 to 1:05 was something else. We pulled it into high gain. It's a chorus of voices, layered over what sounds like flowing water chants. We can't decipher the words, but it's there. I closed my eyes, heart thudding. That's how the thing vanished. It channeled energy through the ground, sang me into submission, or tried to. Norton slid a thick gauze over my wrist. Let's focus on having you patched up. We're sending a team up at first light: engineers, biologists, geologists. Dr. Ruiz and her team want to evaluate that cavern you described. They'll bring ground-penetrating radar. You're off solo duty until further notice. I nodded, restrained exhaustion clambering up my limbs. Okay. At 5:45 a.m., I boarded a Ranger ATV with Ranger Norton at the wheel. Our team included 3 geologists carrying ground-penetrating radar equipment, 1 civil engineer with a portable jackhammer, so they could break through bedrock if necessary, and Dr. Ruiz's microbiologist representative, who lugged a cooler full of sterile sample containers. I had my radio back, new batteries, and a small digital camera. My wrist was bandaged, still throbbing, but functional. We drove up the service road to East Fork Loop Marker 14, parallel to Greenwood Ridge's base. From there, we hiked the steep trail toward the ridge. Patches of fog clung to the canopy, but by 7 a.m., the sun shone weakly through ragged clouds. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach as we approached the gully entrance. Past the collapsed overhang, we stopped at the basin. I took a deep breath, swallowed. The bones were gone, replaced by damp stone with dark streaks, the ichor from last night's massacre. The circular footprint patterns had vanished, sealed by the earth's pulse. The ground was cold, but I hefted the thermal imager. Surface was only 2 degrees Celsius above ambient. The chamber itself might have been warmer at midnight. Something shifted. The engineers signaled us back, GPR, ground-penetrating radar equipment arrayed atop the basin. The screen showed a subsurface anomaly, a void about 5 feet below the rock floor, roughly 10 feet wide, descending at an angle deeper into the hillside. The geologist pointed and jotted notes. They placed chalk markers around an outline. The engineer then broke out a portable hammer drill, began chiseling a small section of shale slab. By 7:37 a.m., they had cleared a roughly 3-foot square opening, revealing the tunnel passage. I exchanged looks with Dr. Ruiz. She inserted a small-bore camera into the dark aperture. The screen flickered with jagged rock walls coated in ichor. The altar was deeper, maybe 20 feet down. She swallowed, voice low. Indeed, it's a chamber. Maybe an artificial cavern carved by human hands decades ago, now repurposed by something else. I swallowed. Would the original cause have been an old mining prospect? The park's geology includes some copper veins. The engineer shook his head. This is not a mining vein. Walls are too rough. No blasted rock, no drill marks. Could be an illegal dugout, maybe for moonshining or hunting preserves. He lifted a glove and ran a finger across carved spiral. These scratches fresh too. Possibly last night. Dr. Ruiz swapped her field gloves. We'll need to survey the entire cavity, not just the entrance. But if we excavate further, we risk awakening whatever lurks inside. We need protocol. I nodded. I'll stand at the ridge's edge, keep watch. Call me if it stirs. They sent down 2 geologists, lined in protective gear, each with a tether and a video feed that streamed to our tablets. I crouched above, scanning the ridge's tree line. My headlamp and thermal imager hung from my belt. Norton stood watch next to me, peering through binoculars. At 8:02 a.m., the screen crackled. One geologist, Dr. Nguyen, crouched in amplified light from a helmet lamp. Behind her lay a spiral of small bones, avian, but no larger than a crow's. She gently scooped one, holding it up. The bone shimmered faintly, not white, but grayish-blue, absent an organic patina. She murmured, "Sample, avian origin, but density off by 20%. She dropped it in a sterile tube. Then the beam swept right, revealing broken remnants of the altar, charred camera lens shards, crimsoned dried ichor. The second geologist gasped. The screen flickered. A humming rose low like a chant, but muffled by rock. I felt it through my boots, a vibration in my chest. My hand dove to the flare gun strapped to my belt. Norton's face whitened. "Marquez, switch off your transceiver." I clicked off my flashlight and radio. It's emanating from below. The chant intensified, layering like voices folded, sewn beneath the earth. My teeth chattered. I pressed my palms over my ears, but it still seeped through. My heart pounded. This was the same chant I'd heard last night. Above me, the ridge trembled, no crack of thunder, but a seismic pulse that rattled my bones. I fell to my knees. The earth beneath me heaved and split. Maybe a foot of rock shifted, thin sheets peeling back to reveal cavernous blackness. The upper ridge cracked open, like a jaw opening. Green light glowed from within, submerging the split in unnatural luminescence. The geologists above on camera shouted, "Back! Fall back!" Dr. Nguyen's voice echoed weakly from underground. I heard routers scraping and cracking. Then silence. The ridge's split ceased. The green glow vanished. Stones settled as though nothing happened. When I regained my footing, I saw no fissure, only an unbroken ridge. No sign anything had shifted. The tunnel entrance sealed itself under a slick of mud and leaves. I stared, bewildered. Norton squeezed my arm. What the hell was that? I shook my head. That was something beyond geology. My voice trembled. We need to seal this for now. Get experts from outside the park. I want sound recordings, seismic data, more mapping. But keep people away. Dr. Ruiz's voice crackled from radio. Someone had restored short-range comms, Marquez. You alive? That was the depression event. Ridge tried to close itself. We need to regroup, assess, call in specialists from State University. That thing below. We recorded something like ultra-low frequency waves, fluctuating thermal plume. It was conscious. It felt ancient. I exhaled slowly. Copy. On my way back, I turned to Norton. That ridge won't stay split long. We need to evacuate. The park's north slope is compromised. He nodded, face pale. We headed back down to the station in shocked silence, just as dawn's first pale light settled on the hemlocks. The next week felt like traversing a waking nightmare. The park's gates were closed, access revoked for all except the core containment team. Campgrounds on the north side were evacuated. Trails leading to Greenwood Ridge were roped off. Command posted notices. Geological hazard. Do not approach Ridge. Harsh as it sounded, some hikers attempted to breach them, seeking adventure or perhaps proof, and were turned back by park police. Dr. Ruiz's team set up a mobile lab at the East Fork Junction. Geologists tunneled test bores into the ridge's slope at precise intervals. GPR surveys mapped a sub-labyrinth of cavities and fissures, 3 major voids, each connected by narrow conduits. The biologists collected water and soil samples. Nothing in cultures grew except a rare fungus genetically homologous to Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the famed zombie fungus, but with unknown properties. Blood samples from wildlife near the ridge, deer, bobcat, wild turkey, showed traces of a novel protein sequence, suspiciously viral in nature. Biochemists couldn't match it to known organisms. It was as though the ridge had birthed or attracted something alien. Every evening, I conducted patrols around the perimeter. By 7 p.m., I had to be back at the station to upload my daily logs, behavioral observations, wildlife camera footage, sire-based recordings of chirps and calls. Bird presence near the ridge crater dropped by 98%. Even nocturnal owls avoided the area. Coyotes howled at night, but their calls drifted toward lower elevations. I felt a sinking feeling. Clearwater Pines had become a quarantine zone for an ecological horror. The children's footprint spiral scratched on the altar became our focus, a symbolic mantra or warning from whatever intelligence presided below. The team speculated perhaps some ancient indigenous structure discovered centuries ago, repurposed by an occult cult. We found no records of moonshine or mining there, but early settler journals mention a small boy lost near the ridge in 1882, vanished without trace despite extensive searches. A family from a local tribe, the Pineview Band, whispered of a spirit child of the forest, a creature that demanded tribute, luring wanderers. My mind raced, the cabin child, an echo of folklore. I spent hours reading old reports in the dusty ranger archives. There were at least 7 disappearances near Greenwood Ridge over the past century. Always solo hikers, always children or young women. The pattern never crystallized, just faint memories. A broken tent, a discarded boot, a trail of muddy footprints that evaporated at the ridge's crest. Now, the missing hiker from last week was the first adult woman in decades to vanish that close to the fire tower. The child's footprints might be the actual culprit, some entity feeding on youth and innocence. One afternoon, my camp phone buzzed. On the line was Chief Ranger Everett, tone curt. Marquez, your report indicated you saw ravens watching you? That's not normal. We don't encourage folklore. Stick to facts. I swallowed. Chief, the ravens circled the ridge every night, calling in unison before the ridge split. There's behavioral irregularity. He sighed. Marquez, until we have concrete evidence, I want you to focus on perimeter security. Keep trespassers out. Leave folklore to the anthropologists. Over. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver. Evidence or not, I had seen the ravens. I had watched the ridge heal itself like a slit wound knitting together. The hollows beneath were not just holes. They were living cavities, folding and shifting. I would keep observing. A fortnight passed, and the park finally assembled an expedition team. Structural engineers, mycologists, cryptozoologists, and geophysicists. Their goal: neutralize the subterranean threat once and for all. They dubbed it Operation Hollow Sunday. At 4 a.m., I gathered with them at the base camp. Gray clouds scud overhead. The ridge had reopened slightly, a faint hairline crack traced along its north face. The underground anomalies were still thermally active. Our orders: infiltrate the ridge, document the main chamber's interior, and remove or seal the source if possible. I hefted my kit: shotgun with bean bags, flare gun, pistol with frog-pattern pepper spray, headlamp, a sidearm loaded with rubber bullets, plus a rechargeable spotlight. I also carried the missing hiker's camera lens, sealed in a glass jar, its edges still rimmed with ichor. I wore full-neck Kevlar and a helmet with an integrated microphone. Under the vest, a small Bible I kept for comfort. Dr. Ruiz, flicking her own headlamp on, turned to me. Marquez, if your instincts kick in, withdraw. We'll cover you. I nodded, swallowing. If I go missing, leave me. Don't look back. She shook her head. Don't be dramatic. We've got GPS tags in our jackets. If you don't report by 10 a.m., we'll assume you're in distress. We'll send in a rescue drone. I forced a grin, but my throat burned. Got it. At 4:17 a.m., we arrived at Greenwood Ridge's northern lip. Engineers set charges to breach the rock, but our orders were to find the existing tunnel. By the time the rubble settled, tiny rock slide, carefully cleared, a yawning hole gaped at us. Light spilled from our headlamps into a slanted crevice. Dr. Nguyen was first down, slim, determined. She descended a rope, gingerly stepping onto the lower ledge. We followed, tied to the same belay. Inside, the air was thick with damp earth and something sickly sweet, an aroma like rotting fruit and fungus. My boots landed on a slick of ichor-slicked stone. I flicked my flashlight. Walls were carved with runes, intricate spirals, star-like shapes, glyphs no one could decipher. These were different from the tally-marked child footprints. These were older, weathered, etched deep into granite. Something had been here long before the first tree fell in this forest. I raised my pistol's flashlight. Its white beam revealed the speckled mass ahead, the main chamber. Bones littered the floor, cattle bones, deer pelvises, bare rib fragments. Beneath them, I glimpsed glints of metal, rusted remnants of camping gear. Piles of clothing matted with ichor lay heaped at the chamber's far wall, like discarded laundry. I swallowed hard. Dr. Ruiz clicked on her headlamp. Marquez over here. Found a vessel. Looks like someone used this place as an altar for decades. I crossed her side. She knelt next to a basin carved into stone, a shallow basin with rails at the edges. The rails were slightly inclined, as though directing fluid toward a narrow channel under the wall. The channel disappeared into darkness. Bones and shards protruded from the basin's lip, tiny bird bones, large dog bones, up to elk antler fragments. The rails were smeared with black ichor. I brought my face close. No smell like last time. This ichor was drying crumbly. At the basin's center sat a stone bowl. A breath clogged in my throat. In the bowl was a human skull, a child's skull crushed slightly, eye sockets ground smooth as river rock. A cross was carved into the forehead. Beneath the skull's cheekbone, I saw a crude carving. Now we listen. Dr. Ruiz's voice dropped. Marquez, note the inscription. The child's skull is still accepting. She motioned to deeper shadows where I saw another mound of bone, leg-shaped wooden stakes, ribs stacked like pickets, with a hollowed skull at the apex, like a crown on a throne. The mound rose nearly 8 feet tall, constructed from bones of multiple species, raven, deer, human, bear, woven with sinew-like roots. My head thundered. Is this what's feeding the ridge? She nodded. The chorusing sound, it could be emanating from a hive of bone, infusing the cavern with some biophysical resonance. These diagrams on the walls, I suspect they function as conduits, channeling energy from the living forest into this nest. A cold pressure pressed my lungs. I raised my pistol. Shotgun and flare guns hung by my side. The only light was our lamps. I felt eyes watching from unseen hollows. The floor-wired wires of bone-thin roots squared underfoot. If I stepped wrong, I risked contact with exposed roots, capillaries pulsing with bioluminescent ichor. I took a trembling step back. We can't stay here. But Dr. Nguyen emerged from the shadows, wincing. I think I have something. Come here. She stepped toward a narrow corridor carved into the far chamber. I followed, careful to keep my flashlight on the bone altar. The corridor narrowed into a vertical shaft, less than 4 feet across, leading deeper into the earth. Dr. Ruiz laid a supportive hand on my arm. Our teams estimate this shaft descends 20 feet, ending in a small chamber. If we go further, we risk destabilizing everything. But if that child's skull is part of a ritual, it's possible the singer was in that lower chamber, the voice I heard. We need to confirm. I swallowed, lifting my flashlight into the shaft. Lead on. I crouched through the narrow shaft. The walls were slick with ichor, making my knees slide on contact. The air was warmer here, humid. Dr. Nguyen and the engineer followed, each tethered by rope. At the bottom, we emerged into a circular chamber, no larger than 15 feet across, walls curving up to block out any light. Only our headlamps cut through the gloom. In the center stood a figure hunched, surrounded by a circle of small, primitive runes carved in stone, glowing faintly green like bioluminescent lichen. I recognized the runes as letters from an archaic oak weaver script, used by an indigenous sect of the Pineview Band, now defunct. The figure knelt on a pile of bones, layer upon layer, first deer skulls, then raccoon paws, then a child's remains, but stacked in concentric spirals that formed a stone dais. The figure wore rags of animal hide, caked in dried ichor. Its arms, when it lifted them, revealed spindly bone filaments twisting out of its flesh, knitting into spidery wings. The face was a pustulating mask of decayed flesh and bone, eye sockets empty, mouth split wide, tongue gray-black. I swallowed my scream. My knees buckled as that figure raised its arms in a slow, deliberate motion, opening its hollow mouth. A chant rose, "Weep, weep, we are the forest, we have no end." Each word slid through my mind like needles woven in a tapestry. The runes on the walls flared brighter, casting greenish specters that danced across the bone dais. I jolted backward, shouting, "Run!" Shots echoed in the chamber. Dr. Nguyen had fired her pistol. Rubber bullets slammed into the figure's torso. It twitched, but didn't collapse. Instead, it stretched its wings, narrow, bony appendages that reached the chamber's ceiling, and took a breath. The chant escalated, layering voices beyond human register, dozens, possibly hundreds, echoing from within its ribcage. I fumbled for my flare. My fingers closed around the grip. Before I could raise it, hot air rushed past, whipping my hair. The figure unfurled further, bones clicking. It lunged at Dr. Nguyen, claws extended. She screamed and ducked behind the bone dais. I fired the flare into its chest, red fire blossoming in the cavern. The creature shrieked, high, ear-shredding bellow that reverberated in my skull. Sparks of green light skittered off the runes, flickering out. The creature's wings convulsed, bones splintering where the flap of charred feathers once was. I fired 2 more flares, but it didn't burn. Instead, it convulsed violently, then disintegrated in a gout of black ash. icer droplets spattering around the chamber. The chanting ceased. The runes flickered and dimmed. The bone dais trembled, then settled. Silence. I felt on my knees, chest heaving. The engineer crouched beside me, white-faced, gasping. Dr. Nguyen lay curled behind the dais, trembling. I rose unsteadily, scanning. All that remained was the altar of bones, charred now, fragile, but intact. The child's skull at the dais's center was cracked but whole, a fissure running through its forehead. No voice lingered. The green glow of runes faded to dull gray. The air felt normal again. I knelt beside the dais. In the center, the child's skull lay, eye socket staring at me. I reached out, heart pounding, gently tracing the carved cross on its forehead. My hands trembled. Dr. Ruiz's voice crackled from my earpiece. Marquez, what's your status? We lost feed. I exhaled, pressing the mic. Target destroyed. Require extraction. Heading up, I wrapped the cracked skull in a sterile pouch Dr. Ruiz had provided. The runes on the walls were now mere scars, no longer glowing. The tunnel had fallen silent, as though the cavern exhaled once and then gave no more. I called out to the engineer. Let's go before this place closes again. The ascent up the shaft felt surreal, like climbing out of a nightmare. The engineering team had braced the walls with metal braces so we could scale up. My headlamp's beam wobbled as my legs shook. Finally, I emerged into the main chamber, chest heaving. The geologists and Dr. Ruiz cheered, but I barely heard them. My eyes were fixed on the daylight streaming from the breach. I staggered toward it. Above, the ridge was still intact, no fissure. The hill's slope was as it had been days ago. Not a trace remained of the collapsed walls. I blinked. Had we dreamed it all? No, my wrist throbbed, my lungs burned, and the child's skull was safe in my pack. We retraced our steps to the surface at 8:52 a.m. The containment team debriefed us. No signs of further cave-ins. The ridge face was once more unbroken. Drone footage concurred. No subsurface anomalies visible. The GPR scan showed a collapsed chamber, filled by a mixture of rock and debris. The main cavern sealed itself. I sat on a rock, watching Dr. Ruiz and the engineers talk in hushed tones. Rain began to patter from a light drizzle overhead. The canopy glistened. I pressed my wrist. Bruising had spread into a dark purple halo. Dr. Ruiz wandered over to me, holding a thermos of coffee. She handed it to me. You okay? She asked, voice gentle. I took a sip, warmth radiating through my chest. The coffee tasted bitter, like charcoal and ash. I nodded. We did it. It's sealed. She exhaled. For now. But the protein sequence from that ichor, it's not gone. It might resurface elsewhere under favorable conditions. We need to monitor wildlife radiations, water chemistry. This isn't over, just relocated. I gazed back at the ridge. So we lock it away, wait for the next sign. Then we return. She nodded. It's our duty. The forest protects itself. We just have to listen. 1 month later, Pineway Road reopened. East Fork Loop stood in full bloom, trilliums waving under pale sun, thrushes warbling overhead. The fire tower foundation had been removed. Rumors circulated in local guides about the ridge that can't be reached, a phantom gap that appears in fog, vanishing by morning. Few took the warning seriously until the children's footprints began to show along the trail. I was on patrol at dawn, scanning the forest floor near Loop Marker 5. A series of small bare footprints traced a spiral around an upturned log. I dropped to one knee, examined them. Only 10 prints, smithereens in wet soil, then vanished at the log's edge. I scanned the area. No sign of children or frightened hikers. No shredded gear, just footprints. I tapped my radio. Dispatch, Marquez calling in. Found spiral footprints in wet soil at Marker 5. No sign of owner. Looked like children's prints. Request immediate perimeter check. Over. Static, and then the dispatcher's reply. Copy that, Marquez. Teams deploying. Over. I rose, shoving my gloved hands into my pockets. Raised my head to the canopy. A breeze rippled the pine needles. I felt a faint prickle at the nape of my neck. I turned. A raven perched on a low branch, head cocked, reflective eye watching me. It caught as though delivering a message. I held its gaze, then turned away. The forest seemed to exhale a slow breath as though saying, "We have more to tell you." I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked toward the footprints, ready to watch, ready to listen. The forest was alive with secrets, and I was the ranger sworn to guard them, no matter the cost. I remember stepping onto the damp forest floor just after 5 p.m., the sky above smeared with bruised purples and grays as the sun dipped behind the rolling ridges of Pine Hollow National Preserve. My Jeep's headlights cut narrow beams through the thinning evening mist as I killed the engine. A chill draped itself over my shoulders, sticky with last night's rain, when I zipped up my fleece jacket and slung my pack onto my back. The preserve's northeastern boundary sign, paint peeling, letters sagging, loomed a few yards ahead. Pine Hollow National Preserve. Authorized personnel only after sunset. I nudged the gate open and passed through, leaving the road behind me. As a senior park ranger, I was well acquainted with Pine Hollow's winding trails, ancient cedar stands, and marshy hollows. But tonight, something felt off, an undercurrent of silence lingering beneath the usual evening chorus of insects and distant owl calls. My pulse quickened when I felt a cold draft swirl between the trees, carrying a faint, hollow hum that sounded almost like distant chanting. I paused, headlamp stuttering on as the beam caught a shimmer of movement at the edge of my vision. Nothing there, just trembling fern fronds. My mission was routine, a bat survey at 2 sites along the Long Ridge Trail, plus a security sweep of the Walnut Bottom campsite near the preserve's southern border. But I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. The preserve's lead ecologist had emailed me at noon, reporting odd camera trap footage showing a long-legged figure glimpsed at dusk, thin, unnaturally tall, standing on the far ridge with limbs that bent in uncanny angles. He'd attached a still frame, a silhouette 8 feet tall, spidery arms hanging below the knees, head tilting side to side as though surveying the tree line. Experts he consulted had been baffled. No known wildlife fit that description. I chalked it up to a deer glimpsed through a distorted lens or rogue infrared glare. But now, standing amid oak and cedar in the gloaming, I understood why the ecologist was rattled. Before I could dwell further, I tapped my radio. Dispatch, Ranger Lynn checking in. Beginning patrol from Northern Gate at 17:12 p.m. I'll be heading west to Long Ridge Bat Site. Over. A crackle, then the dispatcher's voice. Copy that, Lynn. Badger Watch called in recent camper, complaining of hearing screams near Walnut Bottom last night. Want you to check that next. Over. Copy. I replied, tone level. I'll investigate. I slung the radio back onto my vest and clicked on my headlamp's white beam. The trail in front of me was slick with moist pine needles. I set off, boots sinking into the spongy duff as I followed the narrow track deeper into the forest. The sun hung low behind a ridge, painting mottled shadows on the bark of ancient pines. Just before 5:30 p.m., I arrive at the first bat monitoring station, a platform with mist nets strung between two cedar trunks, floodlight rigged overhead. Tonight, I was scheduled to collect echolocation data, examine captured specimens, all carefully handled and promptly released, and check the ultrasonic acoustic recorder. I paused at the net's edge and flicked my gloves on. My breath steamed in the lamp's glow. Half a dozen bats flitted above the clearing, Myotis lacifugis, little brown bats, swooping in tight arcs to feed on moths disturbed by the lamp's glow. I retrieved my handheld detector, toggled to frequency 30 to 60 kilohertz, and recorded the staccato pings as the bats flew. Satisfied, I turned to secure the net, unlacing its weighted edges from the surrounding brush. Then the breeze shifted and I caught a faint stench, acrid, like burning hair mixed with damp leaves. The bats scattered, screeching alarm calls as though spooked by something not visible. I raised my headlamp, sweeping its beam across the clearing. The trunks cast long fingers of darkness. The acoustic reader on top of the platform blinked normally. No abnormal spikes in echolocation. But as I packed the net, the low hum returned, throbbing. It came from Long Ridge itself, a quarter-mile northwest. The ridge loomed, jagged and dark, like the spine of some great beast. I closed my eyes, focusing. The hum felt like a heartbeat, gradually pulsing faster and louder, as though a giant drum buried within the mountain was being struck in time with my own pulse. Goose flesh flared on my arms. I shook my head. Bats chirp in pulses, high-pitched, tinny. This was a low, guttural resonance. I hurriedly packed my gear into my pack. A wind rustled the canopy, sending shivers down the clearing. The bats had retreated to the underbrush, silent now. I slung the net over my shoulder and started down the trail towards Site 2, scanning the treetops for flickers of motion. 20 minutes later, I reached Long Ridge's second bat station near an old logging spur. As I approached, I heard a distant snap, like a heavy branch breaking. I swung my beam toward the ridge, nothing but black silhouettes of hemlocks and firs. The spur here was a flattened, muddy track lined with rotting logs, leading to a small, level clearing where the acoustic recorder and net were set. I took a deep breath and crossed the clearing, kneeling to retrieve the data card from the recorder. Simultaneously, I caught movement at the forest's edge, a dark shape, tall and lithe, slipping between the trees. My headlamp flicked to the spot. A 6-foot deer? No, it moved with fluid, human-like grace, then vanished behind a trunk. A moment of static, then a glint of something long and skinny, as if a limb stretched beyond normal proportions. I snapped my torch around, but the creature had melted into shadow. My pulse thundered. I tapped my radio, but only static answered. The preserve's ridges often created blind zones. I'd have to press on alone and hope for cell coverage later. I slipped my data card into an evidence envelope and logged the data with my notepad. 17:48 p.m. Bat Station 2. No anomalies in echolocation. Note potential visual sighting of long-limbed figure on ridge slope. Investigate further when possible. I returned equipment to the pack and scanned the tree line again. Twilight deepened, and the reserve's usual chorus of crickets and tree frogs began. But beneath it all, the hum pulsed again, louder, a throbbing that rendered my spine rigid. Something about Long Ridge had awakened. My stomach rolled. I closed my eyes momentarily, steadying my breath. I needed to finish logging data and move on. I keyed the radio, dispatch Lynn. Bat station logs complete. Proceeding toward Walnut Bottom campsite. This may be a lengthy patrol. I'll check in once I reach the Eastern Trail. Over. Static. No response. Must be out of range. I exhaled and swung my pack onto my shoulders, following the logging spur down the slope. The trail here was littered with rotting stumps and moss-thick logs, trunks slanting at steep angles. My boots sank in the mud. I sloshed down gullies crisscrossing the spur, careful not to twist an ankle. The hum grew fainter as I moved away from the ridge, but I still felt its pulse deep in my bones. As I descended, the forest thickened, alders, maple saplings, ancient hemlocks wrapped in a dense canopy. The air was cold and damp, each breath tasting like rancid earth. Twilight bled into dusk. The path narrowed until I could barely see my boots beneath the beam. Twice I glimpsed bright orange-yellow eyes reflected in the lamp, glowing too high off the ground to be a raccoon or fox. Each time I swung the light, a pair of eyes blinked at me from atop a fallen log, then vanished into gloom. I convinced myself it was merely deer caught in the light, though their eyes usually sat lower, nearer the brush. But these had been taller, more elevated, placed as if on stilts, like someone perched on a plank, waiting. I forced my heartbeat slow as I rounded a bend and spotted the Lenox Creek Bridge, a small, rotting wooden span arching over a creek lined with mossy limestone. The water below rippled silver in the lamp's glow. I crossed carefully, resting a hand on the split railing, and heard the faint crunch of gravel behind me. I swung around, nothing. The road dipped down to a muddy embankment, and I could just make out the faint outlines of picnic tables at Walnut Bottom campsite. By the time I reached the campsite, half hidden by alders and willow brush, night had swallowed the sky. My headlamp's white beam danced across overturned chairs, abandoned fire pits ringed with cold ashes, and a scattering of folded tents wedged beneath trees. Walnut Bottom was only open for hikers in summer. Law forbade camping here. But last night, a group of 3 backpackers, 2 adults, 1 teenager, had set up illegally, lighting a campfire against regulations. According to a Badger Watch volunteer, one of the hikers called 911 at 10:30 p.m., reporting demonic screams echoing from the woods, then hung up. Rangers found no campers at 11 p.m. The tents had collapsed, gear scattered, but no footprints leading away. No signs of struggle, just an eerie silence. I switched my lamp to red beam to avoid spooking any potential wildlife. I advanced quietly, scanning the brush. The fire pit's embers were cold. A wooden sign, Walnut Bottom Campsite, no open fires, no camping after 2000, was partially fallen, its letters faded. I noticed fresh claw marks gouged into the wood. I walked to the edge of the clearing, circling it clockwise, watching for footprints. The soft earth was broken, 2 sets of boot prints leading toward the creek, then stopping abruptly at the water's edge, though the prints were as though paused mid-step, as if the hikers simply vanished. No drag marks, no blood. I knelt, brushing aside turf. The water had washed away familiar imprints, but a single shoe lay on the creek bank, mud-caked, size 11 men's boot, its laces frayed ragged. I recognized the brand from previous patrols, High Country Hiker Pro. I tagged it as evidence. No sock inside. Had the hiker removed it, or had something taken it? A gentle breeze stirred the underbrush, and from the darkness beyond the creek, I heard the faint wail of a scream, not high-pitched, but low and drawn out, like a woman crying out in deep anguish. The sound was neither near nor far. Resonance played tricks on perception in Walnut Bottom's hollow sanctum. The scream faded, replaced by silence so thick it felt suffocating. I key my radio, voice hushed. Dispatch, Lynn. At Walnut Bottom. Found 1 men's size 11 boot near creek. No tents, campers gone. Heard call report of screams. We'll wait 15 minutes for any sign, then proceed to thorough grid search. Over. No response. I clicked off the radio and straightened, muscles taut. I decided to call for backup once I was back in range. I walked toward the creek bank and felt the ground give a single low thrum. My heart leaped. The creek's water, caught in my headlamp's sheen, glowed faintly orange, like molten metal. For a heartbeat, the creek seemed to breathe, water receding, then rising, as though inhaling every sound. Then the water stilled, fading back to ordinary ripples. I swallowed hard and moved away from the creek, returning to the clearing. The trees loomed like silent sentinels. At 20 feet away from the center pit, I scanned the ground. 2 sets of small prints circled the pit, 5-inch-long shoe prints. Not hikers, no boot-outsole tread. Crowned in mud, they hadn't been there before. I knelt, tapping a gloved fingertip into the center of 1 print, cold, gritty, too small for an adult. I drew my handheld flashlight closer and saw they were too long to be child shoes, more elongated and narrow, like something animal had passed on 2 feet. The prints formed a perfect circle all around the pit, 10 prints in total, suggesting something had paced around the fire, kept watch. I rose, unease coiling in my gut. If someone or something had lingered and watched the campers, then they must have triggered the terror that drove them off. And if they paced the fire pit at Walnut Bottom, could they still be lurking? I took a few steps toward my Jeep gateway, hesitated, the hum bubble beneath my feet resonating through each step. The forest's usual chorus, night insects, frogs, had grown quiet. In that abrupt hush, I felt the thin hairs on my neck stand. I quietly circled the clearing again, scanning the tree line. Then I saw it. Atop a fallen log at the border of the clearing, a figure perched perfectly still, a silhouette 6 feet tall, long arms dangling halfway down its shins, knees bent at odd angles. Its head was tilted politely to one side, as though listening for my approach. It stared at me, 2 pinpoints of white in the gloom, unblinking. My lamp caught the glint. No pupils, only empty glare. As I raised my light to get a better view, the figure flung itself backward into the trees, landing without a sound. My legs locked. The hum spiked, then flattened. I swallowed, trying to regulate my breathing. For a long moment, everything hung suspended. My labored breath, my pounding pulse, the shrubs rustling as something large moved deeper into the woods. Finally, I forced my legs to move. I took 2 ready-step paces and sprinted toward the Jeep. The creature didn't give chase. I didn't look back. Inside my truck, I slammed the door, locked it, panting. I pressed my back against the driver's seat, heart threatening to leap out of my chest. The red lamp on my dash blinked, the radio cold. I flicked the master power to on and tapped the mic dispatch lid. Cited possible watcher at Walnut Bottom. Need immediate squad assistance. Over. A crackle, then copy Lynn. Back up out of range. Will dispatch bugle unit from East Camp. ETA 15 minutes. Over. I exhaled, forced my breathing slow. I peered out the windshield, scanning the road's edge, and thought I saw a pair of legs standing at the far verge of the clearing, spindly, too long, knees bent backward. But when I blinked, nothing. Only whispering wind and pine needles. I forced my eyes back on the road. Understood. I murmured. I'll wait here. I sat in the Jeep with only red interior lights on, radio at the ready, shotgun across my lap, pepper spray clipped to my vest, sidearm holstered to my hip. My headlamp hung on the dashboard. Outside, the woods pressed in like a living wall. Every snapped twig, every rustling leaf felt amplified. My phone no bars. I thought of the campers, gone without a trace of where they went, save for that boot encircling prints, and the watcher perched on a log, staring at me as though it had been expecting me to arrive. That hollow sense of being watched turned my skin to gooseflesh. From somewhere in the darkness, a hissing hissed, like exhaled breath or water seeping through a crack. I spun my headlamp across the clearing. The brush parted, revealing a dark shape glimpsed at the far margin, half hidden behind a cedar. The branch snapped. Then stillness. Minutes passed 10:15 until my radio crackled. Bugle unit, this is dispatch. Ranger Lynn at Walnut Bottom. Confirming backup ETA 2 minutes. Over. I exhaled relief. Copy that, dispatch. I'm at the Jeep gate, standing by. I tapped off the radio and rested my forehead against the headrest. My body hummed with adrenaline. A shrill whistle sounded, the bugle unit approaching. I swung the driver's door open as two fellow rangers, Sanchez and Amani, jogged in, flashlights raised, rifles drawn. "Lynn, what did you see?" Sanchez asked, face pale in his lamp's glow. Spindly figure, taller than a man, arms halfway down at shins, perched on a log, makes eyes like chrome, I rasped, pointing to where the watcher had been. It fled into the woods behind the fire pit. Amani scanned the tree lane. Copy that. Let's check the campsite. She led a flashlight toward the grounds. Sanchez took my shotgun from my lap and slung it. The three of us circled the pit, paces barely above tick step. I held my lamp low, looking for prints. As we circled, I felt the hum throb through my boots. Sanchez knelt beside one of the small shoe prints. They're barefoot. Strange prints, no treads, just scraped crescent shapes and that swirl pattern in the center. He snapped photos. I recognized that swirl from the Bat Station prints, a circle with a spiral inside, traced carefully. Something was marking each location it visited. Perhaps the watcher itself, claiming its territory. A sudden scuffle sounded near the creek. I flipped my light over. The lens illuminated a teenager cowering on the muddy bank, eyes glazed, mouth open in a silent scream. He must have been one of the hikers. "Over here," I shouted. He turned, blinking, fear expanding his pupils. His clothing was torn, muddy, his left arm scraped raw. We approached slowly. Saknez reached him first. The boy pointed into the woods, voice trembling. "It's there, in the pines, shadow legs." His voice trailed off. I knelt, placing a gloved hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. You're safe now. Where are your parents?" He shook his head. "I don't know. We were at that campfire screams. They ran. Then I couldn't follow. Amani helped him stand. You're alone. How old are you?" 9, 10, I'm not sure. They left me." He whimpered. "They said I'd be safe. I saw Watcher." He pointed tremulously off to the northeast. I followed his finger. The trees looked normal in the lamp's glow. Sanchez wrapped the boy in a foil blanket. "You've been here all night?" He nodded, eyes brimming. I hid behind a stump, watched, didn't dare move. I exhaled, adrenaline spiking. The ranger and me took charge. Okay. We get Hastings on the location, call his parents in the morning, and we stay here until first light. Don't leave, buddy. We'll keep you safe." He nodded, shivering. I span my flashlight across the clearing. Every tree looked unnaturally tall, its bark leering in the red beam. Fog drifted low over the ground, like fingers reaching out. The hum throbbed solidly now, as though the watcher was beating its stilted limbs against a hidden drum. The three of us formed a defensive triangle around Hastings. I cleared my throat. "We'll hold until sunrise, then widen search for the others. Maybe they ran north toward Long Ridge. But let's not split up." stick together. We padded deeper into the campsite, setting up a makeshift watch rotation. I took the first shift. At 20:30 p.m., I stationed myself by the fire pit, shotgun across my lap. Sanchez and Amani patrolled the perimeter, their flashlight beams roaming over impenetrable gloom. As darkness deepened, the tree frogs quieted and the crickets stuttered out. The only sound was the hum, soft, rhythmic. It felt as though the ground itself was sighing. At 21:15 p.m., I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun nothing. I shone my light beyond the pit, just woods. My brain conjured shapes in the black. I gripped the shotgun tighter. A low exhale of breath brushed the back of my neck. I turned, no one. Goosebumps prickled my arms. The hum rose, then steadied. A flicker of movement caught my periphery. The watcher, half hidden behind an oak, only its knees and ankles visible, limbs so long they strained its clothing below the knees, twisting at impossible angles. Its arms dangled, its head cocked. My chambered shotgun trembled in my arms. I whispered, reflexively raising my voice, "Hey, beast, come out and face me." It didn't move. Its wide eyes shone like distant stars. I pressed my flashlight forward. Its head slanted to the side, as though listening. My blood ran cold. I dared not fire. If the watcher took a step, those limbs would carry it 30 feet in an instant. I exhaled slowly. Back up. I said to the watcher, though no one beside me could see it. It tilted its head, then retracted behind the oak. The hum stuttered once, twice, then drifted off into near silence. The watcher was gone, or closer than I wanted to imagine. My heart thundered. I clicked off the shotgun safety and slid the butt into my shoulder. My headlamp cast jagged shadows into the darkness. I counted 10 seconds, 15, nothing. The watcher's presence lingered like a stain on my mind. At 2200 hours p.m., I tapped Amani on the shoulder. "Get over here." I saw it by the oak. Long-limbed, she shone her headlamp. "Where?" I pointed, no figure in sight. She frowned. "I see nothing." Sanchez radioed in from the ridge side. "All clear on the north perimeter. No movement except for local wildlife." I exhaled. "Heard you." I saw it too. It disappeared in the darkness. Amani's lips thinned. "Maybe we're all exhausted. Let's get the boy to the Jeep. Shut off the lights. Wait 5 minutes, then rotate shifts." I nodded, gathering Hastings into my arms. He whimpered, curling his legs into his chest, his small weight a silent plea. I trudged toward the Jeep with him cradled in my arms, shotgun still slung across my chest. Sanchez and Amani followed with rifles drawn. I turned back once, a flicker on the hill, white eyes perched on the far ridge, just beyond the trees, fleeting. I blinked, nobody there. I locked the Jeep's doors and set Hastings on the passenger seat, tucked in blankets. I switched the truck to beacons only, casting faint amber into the clearing, far less likely to attract attention than bright headlights. I nuzzled Hastings gently. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe." He hummed, head sinking to his chest. I exhaled. The hum was muted here, 3 meters from the clearing center. But I still felt it, thrumming beneath my boots. At 22:15 p.m., I shifted off my jacket, sliding it over Hastings' shoulders. I took Sanchez's spot, leaning back in my seat with shotgun across my lap. Outside, rain began, first a drizzle, then a steady patter. The forest's breathing grew muddled by the raindrops, but behind it all, the hum lingered. I pressed my head against the headrest and closed my eyes for 15 minutes. When I reopened them, I felt a tightness in my chest. The hum had stopped. The rain was heavier now, pattering loudly. I keyed my radio, dispatch Lynn. All quiet at campsite. Hum dissipated. No sign of figures. All secure for rotation. Over. No response. Dispatch probably logged off for the night, I muttered. I snapped off the radio. I climbed out of the Jeep, retrieving Hastings and handing him to Amani, who was already dozing in the back seat. I'm heading back for shift. Amani gave a curt nod, turning Hastings so his head rested on her lap. Before I stepped away, I flicked my flashlight across the clearing. The fire pit glowed faintly red from glowing embers below the ash, strange, given how cold the ashes felt earlier. No open flame, but a red-hot glow just beneath the surface. I blinked. A single rune was carved into the center stone ring, one I hadn't noticed before, a spiral with 2 short bars on either side. I swallowed, heart skittering, and stepped into the darkness, following the path back to the Jeep. My shift ended at 2300 hours p.m. I swapped places with Amani, who drove Hastings to the ranger station for warming and paperwork. Ranger Sanchez and I took the path up to Long Ridge, lanterns slung before us, rifles at the ready. The preserve's southern border was lit by amber light from our headlamps, but the ridge above was black as oil. Every step up the incline felt like wading through water. Mud clumps pulled at my boots. Silence pressed in, broken only by distant raindrops striking oak leaves. A gust of wind rattled the canopy, sending a prickle of tension through my spine. 20 minutes later, we reached the ridge line and crossed the crest, an expanse of coarse heather opening to the stars. Directly east, a pale moon hovered behind ragged clouds. The second bat station, long deserted, sat off to our left. I swung my beam around. The acoustic recorder blinked green, a small, flickering beacon. I crouched, clicked off my boots, and knelt to check the recorder's readouts. Frequency spikes were flat since the bats had vanished earlier. But layered beneath the ultrasonic blips, I heard faint, distorted echoes, like voices drowned in static at 150 hertz. I toggled to my mid-range audio detector on full gain. It sputtered to life a long, low moan that felt symphonic. I thumbed record. Sanchez whispered, "Hear that? Sounds like whispers." I exhaled, nodding. Ghost bats? Might be insects or the ridge itself singing. Place's ancient bedrock could resonate at low frequencies, but the hum's timbre didn't match geologic echo tests I'd run before. It sounded almost intentional. I rechecked the acoustic recorder's cabling. No water intrusion, no sign of tampering. It wasn't enough to remove the recorder. I switched it for a fresh unit, sealed the data card, and jotted notes. 23:17 p.m. second station. Low frequency humming recorded. Likely not bat related. We hefted our packs and proceeded east toward the main ridge loop, where the preserve's southern border trail dipped into a gully leading down to the fence line. The trail here was precipitous, more rock than soil, slick with rain. I led, rifle raised, peering into the gloom. Branches snapped above. I swung my headlamp upward. 3 black shapes perched high in a red oak, 2 still to be squirrels. Their silhouettes were elongated, legs folded inside ragged coats of fur. Or was it matted flesh? The shapes didn't move. I waited. Finally, 2 let out low crows, and their bodies dropped. Gravity claimed them. One slammed against the slope 5 feet below with a wet thunk. The second managed a feeble flutter before plummeting to its death. Both lay still, wings splayed grotesquely. I exhaled in relief. Bats, I said. Probably just roosting early. Sanchez nodded but stared, frown deepening. But those looked too big for any local bat species. I reopened my lamp's iris. The slope below looked normal, forest floor strewn with dead leaves. The 2 corpses lay slack. I advanced, crouching over the nearer shape. Its wingspan was nearly 4 feet. Furless, leathery membrane stretched between elongated fingers. Its head was a flattened skull with beak-like jaws. I'd never seen a bat like this. I tapped it with my boot. The membrane tore easily, sputtering a fine dust into the air. Its bones were brittle, hollow, weightless. The body was cold already. I stifled a shiver and backed away. We had no time to process this anomaly now. We continued east, descending to the fence line. At 0:10 a.m., we reached a small ravine, lunging downward toward a creek that fed into Lennox Creek. A small wooden footbridge spanned it, worn planks slick with moss, warped nails protruding like jagged teeth. I crossed it gingerly, eyeing the rushing water below. On the far bank, I noticed shallow footprints in the mud, 4 sets, 2 larger boots, 2 mid-sized shoes. Another set of childlike bare footprints circled the group, echoing the pattern at Walnut Bottom. I snapped photos. This place, I murmured, seems to be sewn together by footprints and chance. Sanchez hovered behind me. You feel that? A draft, like something breathing behind us. I dwindled my beam. The ravine's walls seemed to inhale, the water's surface mirroring starless sky. Then a soft rustle, the bushes parted, and a figure emerged, 6'3", arms dangling halfway to its knees bent at unnatural angles. Its head perched on spindly neck tufts of thin, stringy hair. It smiled, stretched lips parted, revealing a row of jagged teeth. Its gaze locked with mine, empty sockets reflecting my lamp. I felt bile rise. The long-legged watcher had returned, this time in the ravine. I raised my shotgun. Stay back. I barked. The watcher cocked its head to one side, limbs shifting almost like a spider, raising its legs. Then it spoke, voice a cracked whisper. Still here. My knees buckled. I fired a single slug. A cloud of feathers erupted as the pellet tore through its chest, but the figure recoiled only slightly, ebony ichor seeping from the wound. It let out a wet gurgle, horrid, as though swallowing molten glass. The world collapsed into slow motion. The watcher advanced, limbs folding inward then springing outward, closing distance in a single bound. Its arms stretched around me in a vice of bone joints. I cried out, wrenching backward, wrenching my shotgun free. I fired again, beanbag round this time, striking its shoulder with a solid thud. The watcher reeled back, clutching its shoulder, a cascade of ebony ichor oozing from the wound. Its head rolled back as it let out a keening chant, three distinct syllables echoing off the ravine walls. Heed, heed. I scrambled on my belly, retreating to the bridge's railing. The watcher lunged, talons outstretched, filling the beam like a half-moon. I fired a red flare directly at its chest. Light blossomed, a starburst of flame, and the watcher screamed, wings folding inward as it collapsed in a heap of bones and black mist on the forest floor. The chanting ceased. The ravine exhaled. I centered my breathing, pulse roaring, and retreated to where Sanchez waited. He stared at the fallen shape. "Are you okay? Do you need a medic?" I closed my eyes, exhaling. "I'm fine. Just keep watch." We'd stopped at the preserve's southern boundary, the gate where my Jeep was parked. I keyed the radio, dispatch Lynn. 3 targets confirmed, 2 watchers down, 2 hikers missing, 1 child found at campsite, another adult still unaccounted. I'm proceeding to Northern Gate. Need medics at base to examine possible hikers. I read you, Ranger Lynn. Medics en route. Copy your return. Over. I climbed into the driver's seat, scanning the map. The unaccounted adult might have fled toward the northeastern woods, or perhaps to the old abandoned ranger cabin near Birch Hollow. Sanchez and Amani piled in beside me. My shotgun span across my lap. My headlamp burned red on the dashboard. The preserve's fence gate clanged as we opened it, tires crunching on gravel. The wipers sweated away the drizzle overhead. We barreled northward down the ridge road, rain plastering reflections of ancient pines on the wet asphalt. At 1 a.m., we approached Thompson's Creek Bridge, sound of rushing water relentless beneath the planks. Flashlights swept the roadside. Muddied footprints led into the cedars beside the creek. I told Sanchez to shine his beam there, just in time to catch a lone adult boot, half buried in mud. I stopped, stepping out into the rain. I knelt, extracting the boot, size 9 women's slip-on with no sock inside. I tapped a footprint next to it, a circle of barefoot prints 5-inch long, swirling toward the creek center. My stomach twinged. Another spiral motif. Sanchez peered into the woods. "You think there's another one in there?" I exhaled. "There has to be." She must have slipped or been forced to follow. I trailed off. If she followed the path, she would end up in Birch Hollow. Once there, she might be absorbed by the forest. Amani's voice took the gloom. "If we can find a way in. The cabin is boarded, sliding windows only. We'll need to go around to the stream side entrance." I nodded. Radio switched off, plunged into the cedars. The forest seemed to lean inward, branches scraping my helmet. At 1:15 a.m., we reached a low bluff above Thompson's Creek. Below, a narrow path zigzagged along the bank. I glanced down. The creek's water roiled, streaks of amber, like molten nickel, racing downstream. The rain battered my coat with cold beads. We followed the creek downstream for 5 minutes, ankle deep in mud. The humidity turned my cheeks slick. Finally, we arrived at the ranger cabin, a small weathered shack built in the 1940s, now seldom used, perched in the bank. The door was secured with a padlock. A broken window, now braced with a weathered board, faced the creek. Moss and ivy clung to its siding. My beam caught faint carvings on the board, rune patterns similar to those at Walnut Bottom, swirls with intersecting bars. The cabin felt alive with dread. I jerked the padlock, but it held fast. Sanchez pried the window board with his knife, levering it gradually until it snapped. Amani bent and peered inside. The cabin's interior was dim. Faint glow from my flashlight revealed scattered belongings. An old park journal, a first aid kit, a camping stove, and propped against the wall a woman's jacket. The same size 9 trail boot lay just inside, the matching boot discarded on the threshold. I recognized the jacket as belonging to the missing hiker, a gray shell with a reflective stripe. Gasped. Amani shone her light deeper. A battered cot held a shape draped in blankets, a woman curled into a ball on her side. Her head was turned away. I raced forward, kneeling, calling softly, "Ma'am? Ranger Lynn, can you hear me?" The shape stirred, head snapping up. It was her Mira Coleman, 27, graduate student who'd reported her father's passing 7 months ago. Her eyes were bloodshot, dark rings beneath them. She peered at me with distended pupils. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped, her voice brittle as dry twigs. Her left arm was scraped raw. She felt feverish. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mira, it's okay. We're here to help. Rangers found your boot. We thought." She cut me off, leaning away. "They told me to follow the hum, that it would lead me back to the cabin. It's safe here." I frowned. "The hum, like a pulse in the earth? That's the Watcher's lure. It always signals danger. We need to get you out of here. It's not safe." Her eyes flicked to the door. "I've been protected. It gave me shelter. Please, you don't understand." She pulled the blanket tighter. Her breathing was ragged. Sanchez shone his lamp across the cabin. A low shelf beside the cot held 7 small stones etched with runes, swirls with bars, and a small bowl filled with a viscous black fluid. Each stone was engraved with a name, her mother's, her brother's, her children's, each half covered with dried ichor. It was a shrine, a protective offering. I recognized the pattern from Birch Hollow native lore. The Pineview Band had long believed certain hollows and rifts in this preserve were gateways to malevolent spirits. The Watcher was one such spirit, requiring tribute to remain sated and allow safe passage. Mira had become trapped by her grief, offering her family's names and blood to seal her safety. I knelt beside her. "I can help you, but you have to trust me." She closed her eyes, head sinking. "I don't deserve to leave. Not after what I did. I pressed my palm to her wrist. Your life is worth saving. She shivered. They took my daughter. I tried to give them to stay away. Her voice cracked. Tears glistened in her eyes. They took Lily. I couldn't protect her. I thought if I offered my love, they'd stop. I exhaled slowly. Come on, you're safe now. We'll get you help. But we have to go. Can you walk? She nodded, trembling. Sanchez offered her a shoulder. She rose slowly, swaying. I handed her my rain jacket. Keep this, I said, forcing a smile. You'll need it. Together, we moved outside. Beyond the window's shattered board, the rain hammered the earth. I scanned the tree line. No sign of the watcher. The creek continued its amber glow, the same patina of molten metal. I shuddered. It would carry any discarded remains downstream to the preserve's main river. We had no time to investigate further. We helped Mira to the jeep. Amani drove us to the ranger station, where a medic team awaited. Dr. Moore greeted us, taking Myra's vitals and ushering her inside. Her white-knuckled grip, trembling from fever and exhaustion, was a testament to what she'd endured. Sanchez and I stepped into the station's garage, closing the door behind us. The night storm rattled the metal roof. I exhaled, running a hand through my damp hair. I still hear it. The hum, like a heartbeat in the earth. Sanchez's face was grave. That watcher, its voice was like music that ripples through your bones. I've never heard anything like it. I nodded. Once it calls you, it anchors you. Mira said it led her to the cabin. It's a lure you can't break away from. I glanced at the wall clock, 2:25 a.m. Sunrise is still 3 hours away. Rangers at Walnut Bottom found Hastings. Amani stayed with him. I want to return to Long Ridge, just to see if the chanting persists. We gotta understand what we're dealing with. Sanchez rubbed his chin. We should rest. Amani said she got some Bluetooth audio of that low growl. We can replay it in the morning. I hesitated, then shook my head. I can't wait. If the hum is still echoing, it could draw more victims. I need to know if it's subsided. Sanchez sighed. All right, I'll come with you. We need to document the low-frequency audio now, before rain and wind wash away any sign. Let's gear up. I grabbed my rain jacket and my blade-tipped walking stick. Sanchez hefted a camera gear pack, his thermal imager, video cam strapped to a stabilizer rig, and a portable recorder with Y-range settings for infrasound detection. We slipped out into the storm. The preserve's entrance gates were closed, but as rangers we had override keys. We cut through the floodlit station yard, heading east to Thompson's Creek Bridge. Water roiled beneath the planks, orange streaks swirling. I paused at the bridge's midpoint. The hum was faint but present, like a tremor in the steel cables. I flipped on the low-frequency recorder. Waves displayed on its screen, rising and falling around 10 to 15 hertz, a frequency too low for human speech. We recorded 5 minutes of continuous feed, then bagged the device in a waterproof pouch. Sanchez lowered the cam and recorded ambient sound, thunder from distant lightning, the river's roar, and beneath it all, a steady pulsing. From the bridge, we marched back toward Long Ridge. Every step up that familiar incline felt like wading into a nightmare. The air grew colder, damp settling in my lungs. By 3:30 a.m., we reached the ridgeline. Running a hand along the acoustic recorder platform, the device had been ripped loose, no sign of its mountings, as if consumed by the earth. I frowned. We replaced it carefully, sealed cables, and turned it on. Battery 50%, Sanchez noted. Recording in 3, 2, 1. The LED blinked red, then green as it began logging. I swept my headlamp westward, the ridge crest, where I'd last glimpsed the watcher. The forest was silent, treetops still. No bats, no owls, only the wind's hush. Then faint rustling. Through the dim red beam, I saw movement 50 feet away. Another watcher, perched on a rock outcrop like a statuesque grim sentinel. This watcher wore tattered gray clothing, though the rags seemed matted with mud and ichor. It lifted its head and met my gaze. Those blank white eyes were dead cold as winter. I steadied my breathing. Record it, I whispered to Sanchez. His cam's infrared sensor clicked on. The watcher tilted its head once, as though curious, then let out a whisper. It wasn't words, more like an undercurrent of notes, low, mournful, weaving chords that felt familiar but twisted. I felt my chest tighten. Each breath felt like wading through cold water. The watcher's chant rose in volume, layering wails that echoed across the ridge. I spun, aiming the cam at the sky. White lines of light from lightning streaked overhead, electrifying the scene. The watcher flung back its arms in an invocation, and the wind seized me, a blast so cold it stung my face. The forest's tapestry, the ferns, cedars, maples, trembled. Sanchez yanked me behind a boulder. It's amplifying through the earth. I can feel it. The pulsing in my chest synchronized with the watcher's chant. My vision blurred. The watcher took a step toward us, jointed legs bending like a grasshopper's, impossibly long. Another step, silent as a shadow. It extended a pale hand, fingertips too slender, almost skeletal. I fired a flare into the sky, red flame blossoming into black. The watcher staggered, and in that moment I seized my radio, voice trembling. Dispatch? Watcher conducting ritual on ridge. Need immediate evac. My words dissolved into static. The radio's battery flicked to 0 dead. I glanced to my belt. Battery gauge read empty. The watcher's ritual was draining power from everything. My heart hammered. With a sudden resolve, I grabbed my shotgun. Sanchez, we have to hit it. He nodded, lifting his cam. I stepped forward, aimed a shotgun. It felt heavy and leaden in my arms. The watcher's chant rose to a fever pitch. I fired. The slug ripped into its shoulder with a sickening crack. Black ichor sizzled. The watcher's head jerked back. But it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a keening wail that twisted the very space around me. Lightning struck the ridge 100 yards off, illuminating the watcher's form, limbs jutting at impossible angles, head flying back, mouth open like a tomb. I fired again. The second slug hit its torso. The instantaneous reaction was blurry. Ichor vaporized into steam, bone and rag exploding outward in a grotesque flourish, then matter unraveling, collapsing into a pile of steaming ash. One final shriek cut through the night like thunder. Then nothing but a hush, eerie, unnatural. Sanchez and I stared at each other, breathing ragged. I turned off my headlamp's red beam, peering into the darkness. No shape moved. No hum reverberated. We exhaled in unison. "We've done it," Sanchez whispered. Yet even as I nodded slowly, I felt a lingering echo, a phantom throb in my chest. The watcher's voice, lingering beneath the wind, an echo on the ridge's bones. I resisted the urge to double-take. Instead, I pressed my palm to my forehead. Sweat and cold raindrops mingled. At 4:16 a.m., we grabbed a recorder and cam, strapped them into waterproof cases, and prepared to leave. The first pale brush of dawn had begun. By the time we limped back to the ranger station, mud-caked, soaked, exhausted, the sky was a bruise of lavender and pink. Hastings, sedated and smiling weakly, sat with Amani in the lobby, quietly playing with a stuffed toy. Mirror to my own weariness, but rooted in hope. Sanchez helped me inside, keeping an eye on the East Camp security camera feed. Images of a silent forest, dew-streaked undergrowth, returning bird life. The GPS logger on my phone finally found a signal. 5:03 a.m. I sent a brief text to dispatch, watcher neutralized. Proceed with cleanup and x-ray remains. No reply. Rangers begin shift at 6 a.m. In the break room, the medics offered blankets and hot coffee. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes. My vision receded into darkness. I dreamed the watcher's white eyes canted to one side, beckoning me heed me, and I froze, trapped in a spotlight of humming, until I jolted awake. By 6:15 a.m., I'd submitted my preliminary report to dispatch, coordinating DNA samples from the watcher's remains, a pile of smoking ash that the cleanup crew had collected. Will the samples show no match to any known species? Will the DNA coil upon itself, unraveling into data void? Genetics can't identify something that defies classification. I sank into a chair beside Amani, who waved a tea mug at me. "Lynn, you okay?" I sipped the tea. "I'll live, but I can still feel the hum." She nodded. "It's our job to monitor. We'll keep the cams running on the ridge. If the watcher's essence tries to reconstitute, we'll catch it." I exhaled, running a hand over my wet hair. "I'm glad we took it out. The preserve's quieter now." She agreed. Birds returned at sunrise. The ridge lost that thrumming. Trees sound normal again. We rose, gathering our gear. Amani packed the bug-out kits with replacement batteries, audio recorders, and a portable EMF sensor, just in case. Our resumes said ranger, cartographer, ecologist, but now we wore badges as guardians against something ancient primal, something that fed on fear and memory. By noon, local news crews had arrived to film at the preserve's northern gate. Rumors of a giant shadow beast had circulated on social media, prompting sensational headlines. We guided them to a vantage point half a mile from the ridge, A still, silent forest wakes of black mud still clinging to leaves. When a relief washed out their questions, we gave them a brief statement. Preserve authorities conducted a wildlife hazard mitigation overnight. All monitoring indicates no further threats. Trails are reopening this afternoon. Campers may return at 2 p.m. Thank you for understanding. The anchor nodded, jotted notes. So we can expect normal hiking today? I forced a small smile. Yes, though we do recommend sticking to main trails and abiding by park regulations. Enjoy your day. Inside the preserve, everything looked normal. Small bands of hikers in neon jackets clambered onto trailheads, chatting, cameras in hand. A group of university students paused to observe a mist net station, bats already out feeding. At Walnut Bottom, new campers set up tents as though nothing had happened. My chest stiffened. Hastings, now reunited with his anxious parents, left the preserve at noon, waving goodbye. Amani gave him a thumbs up. I watched as they drove off, relief in their eyes. But I knew better. The watcher or its kin could return when least expected. And the swirl of runic marks across the preserve marked places where travelers had vanished for centuries. We had purged one, but there were surely more. At 1900 hours p.m. that same day, I returned to Long Ridge with Sanchez and Imani for a routine twilight bat survey, buoyed by sunlight and the forest chatter. The ridge's slope felt less ominous now, the hum gone. We rechecked the second station. The acoustic device registered only standard bat echolocation and the ambient sounds of wind and leaves. We broke for dinner around 19:45 p.m., crackers and stew in the ranger shack. I scrubbed at my wrist. Bruises from last night were yellowing. My palms shook slightly. Sanchez flicked on the lullaby playlist on his phone, instrumental strings to steady us. We needed time to decompress. At 20:30 p.m., we escorted a small group of backpackers to Walnut Bottom, now reopened under our nightly watch. We briefed them. We've had unusual wildlife activity. Stick to your sight. No loud noises. If you hear hum or see anything odd, stay put and call us immediately. They nodded, faces tense but eager to camp. As I walked away, rain began to patter once more, a gentle drizzle. I exhaled. Late that night, at 2300 hours p.m., I returned alone for a final sweep. The campfire pits were smoldering beneath new tent stands. I kept red beam. The kids laughed around a second fire, parents watching. Moonlight sifted through high clouds. All quiet. I scanned for footprints. None of the barefoot swirling prints remained. The earth had swallowed them. I rubbed at my eyes. Did I imagine them in the first place? At the fire pit center, I noticed one small stone set upon the main hearth, round smooth, etched with a swirl and a single bar. I frowned. Water droplets slid off my jacket hood. I bent, turned over the stone. Nothing underneath. Its runic face was fresh, no moss. The ash beneath it was cold, no embers glow. I pocketed the stone carefully. As soon as I held it, the wind died. The crickets fell silent. The campfire's flames ticked lower, as though the world had exhaled. I caught my breath. In that moment, I realized the Watcher's legacy remained. Its marks, its stones, its lure. I had removed the flesh that had stalked the night, but the ancient code, the runes, persisted. I returned to my Jeep at 23:15 p.m., the swirl stone stashed in a small pouch. I peeled open my field notebook and scribbled, site, Walnut Bottom Fire Pit. Found one rune stone, swirl with bar. Note, remains of ritual ongoing, place closed until further notice. My words trailed off. I stare at the swirl, a spiral for eternity, a bar for threshold. I felt both dread and purpose settle in my chest. I keyed my radio's mic, dispatch Lynn. Found runic stone at Walnut Bottom. Recommend immediate closure of camp. Over. Static. Then copy Ranger Lynn. Execute closure. Will handle public messaging. Good work. Over. I switched off the radio and pocketed my lamp. The crickets began to click again. Frogs resumed their distant rumble. The forest teemed with life once more. But I knew the Watcher's footprints, its swirl motifs, would scatter across the preserve. I would patrol for months, maybe years, to find them, to erase each mark. To guard the preserve's fragile boundary between life and nightmare. As the Jeep's headlights cut through the darkness, the swirl stone burned cold in my palm. Pine Hollow's ancient hum had retreated, but its song would echo again whenever a wanderer left their boots behind. And when it did, I would listen and heed the cry of the long-legged watcher. I remember the moment I first stepped onto Ravenwood Loop, precisely at 7:02 p.m. on September 14th. The sky had been a bruised lavender 15 minutes before, but now dusk had thickened into complete night. The flimsy guardrail at the edge of the parking lot rattled in a mild breeze, and my boots crunched on pine needles that carpeted the forest floor. I had volunteered to patrol this backcountry loop tonight to relieve Ranger Santos. She'd been burned out from 8 days straight of full moon patrols. My shift was supposed to be straightforward. Check 2 backcountry campsites, record any wildlife sightings, test remote cameras, and confirm that no hikers had broken the off-hours camping rules. Ravenwood Loop, while remote, had a single official campsite, well known for its nocturnal bear activity. Beyond that, it was expected to remain empty after sundown. But as I flipped on my headlamp and switched my radio to Dispatch Channel 5, I could feel my pulse spike. Ravenwood had its own reputation. Old rumor that a girl had vanished here in 1972, along with her family's campsite, and that it was forgotten in local memory. That fame, plus my new assignment, had kept me awake for hours. But it was my first solo night shift in over a year, and I was determined not to let folklore spook me. I clipped my radio and flashlight onto my gear belt, laced my complaints about insomnia deep in my mind, and set off down the narrow trail toward the first camera station, hoping to clear my head. The trail descended gently for half a mile through towering pines dripping with midnight dew. My headlamp's beam revealed oak saplings and bracken ferns swaying intermittently, but no animal eyes reflecting back. The usual chorus of insects was strangely muted. Only the occasional rustle of small rodents scurrying in the underbrush broke the silence. At the first camera station, Raven Cam 4, I named it, I knelt, opened the black plastic housing, and checked the infrared sensors, all green. Memory card intact, battery at 86%. I swapped in a fresh card, rehooked the housing, and rose. As I stood, a distant yelp echoed from far deeper in the woods, too high-pitched for a coyote, and not at all like a bear's growl. I thought it was an owl until it repeated, closer this time, a single ringing wail that cut through the darkness, followed by abrupt silence. I froze, heart hammering. My breath came shallow. I realized I was gripping the camera housing as though it were all that kept me tethered to reality. The wail echoed again, more urgent, coming from upstream, maybe a quarter-mile away. My rational mind reassured itself. Likely just a barred owl or screech owl, albeit emitting a mournful call. I tapped the record button on my radio, hoping to capture any further audio. Dispatch, this is Ranger Lynn. Heard a single wail, likely an owl, at 7:10 p.m. Sounds like a northern screech owl. All cameras functional. Proceeding to campsite check. Over. Static, then a faint copy. Ranger Lynn. Stay safe. Over. With my nerves settled by dispatch's voice, I resumed the trail, feeling foolish for letting my thoughts swirl with ghost stories. But deep down, I knew my heartbeat hadn't settled. The dark seemed to press in. My headlamp's beam cut a circle of white that revealed a single fallen branch, ginseng roots still protruding from the soil, right at my feet. I stumbled slightly, eyes flicking to the ground out of caution. Minutes passed. The trail forked at a split sign, Campsite 7 North to the left, Campsite 7 South, Euro Bridge to the right. I chose North, the official Ravenwood campsite, whereupon I tightened my hand on the flashlight and rounded the bend. The Ravenwood campsite was off-grid for a reason. It sat deep in a hollow, ringed by rocky ridges on 3 sides, as though encased in a natural amphitheater. When I arrived at 7:18 p.m., it was as expected, an uneven gravel clearing with a rusted picnic table, a solitary fire pit ringed by flat stones, and a dilapidated outhouse 30 yards away. Moss and ferns climbed the table legs, and the fire pit was cold, ash-covered with a thin layer of skunk cabbage leaves, no recent signs of flame. Trees arched overhead, their branches interlacing like skeletal arms. The low wind whispered through their needles, producing a soft, almost music-like drone. I clicked off my headlamp to save battery and switched to my red light setting. The world dimmed, though the outlines of trunks and ferns remained. I approached the picnic table and ran my fingers over its surface, icy slick with condensation. A small scrap of paper lay pinned beneath a flat rock on the table, an old note, edges curled and yellowed. I pulled it free and shined my lamp. The note read, in neat cursive, "They have moved on. Beware the echoes." I frowned. The paper looked recent. No, maybe months old, but not decades. The ink was still legible, though faded. "They have moved on. Beware the echoes." I ran a fingertip over the first word. They? Who? I meant to sign, but who was they? I shoved the note into my jacket pocket for later investigation. It was likely some dumb prank or a careless hiker's joke, though who would dare leave notes like that in a ghost story campground? I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Turning away, I snapped my headlamp back on. It flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I shone it at the fire pit. Earlier gear found here in morning patrols. Charcoal remnants, brown marshmallow sticks. None of that remained. No footprints inside the clearing except my own. I circled the outhouse. The door swung slightly on its hinges, but the stench within told me it had not been used in weeks. All looked as it should, no campers, no trespassers. Satisfied, I crossed the clearing to the trail leading deeper south toward Campsite 5, my next stop. The path to Campsite 5 followed a narrow creek, echoing with the soft splashes of water over rocks. I followed it single file, headlamp trained on the rocky bank. My boots slipped over wet stones, and I used the flashlight in my left hand to probe for holes. At 7:28 p.m., I crossed the collapsed Euro Bridge, an old log structure that had half given way under some recent flood. Only one log remained, slick, moss-covered. I gingerly stepped across it, using my headlamp beam to gauge distance, and landed on the opposite shore. As soon as my boot touched soil, I heard the wail again, softer this time, echoing upstream. This time I felt certain it was a human moan, not an owl. I froze, flashlight beams swinging, looking for movement. Nothing but trees. Yet the call persisted, wavering, like someone dragging a foot through leaf-littered ground. My pulse quickened. I angled up the slope, scanning for any sign of a hiker in distress. But there was no one. No flashlight glow drifting through the canopy, just my solitary beam cutting across shifting shadows. My rational mind told me to check profiles of local rescue calls. No one reported being lost on this trail for at least 6 months. The calls I heard were likely nocturnal wildlife, or, if truly human, a prank. But I felt uneasy. I keyed the radio to my lap. Dispatch Lynn. I'm hearing a series of moaning calls, possibly human distress. Last heard near Euro Bridge. Appears to come from upstream. Will investigate. Over. Static for a moment, then copy Ranger Lynn. Keep your situational awareness. Backing up. Over. The terse message put me on edge. If dispatch was concerned, they wouldn't have said so casually. I took a deep breath and resumed, following the creek path to Campsite 5. At 7:36 p.m., I reached the hidden junction that led to Campsite 5, a site few hikers knew about because it was omitted from printed maps. It sat half a mile off the marked trail, at the mouth of a small gorge where ravens nested in the cliffside. The junction was marked only by a decaying wooden board nailed to a cedar. Campsite 5 unnamed. Most park literature said the site had been decommissioned in 1984 after a series of cattle thefts connected to illegal moonshiners. It was supposed to be off limits. But local climbers occasionally camped there, thinking themselves clever for discovering a forgotten site. I clipped on my headlamp and descended a narrow path. Reality pressed in, ferns and brambles encroached like jealous sentinels. I emerged onto a small ledge overlooking a dry riverbed 2 feet below. At the right edge of the ledge, half hidden by vines, was the skeleton of a maintenance shed. Its tin roof collapsed, walls canted inward. Next to it sat a circular fire ring lined with charred stones and old graffiti, keep out painted in black on the slanted boards of the shed. I crouched, crouching as low as I could to avoid pushing vines aside. The place smelled faintly of mildew and rust. I scanned with my light a half-buried rusted bucket, a pair of tarnished pots, the bleached remains of what looked like a canvas cot wedged near the shed's corner. No recent signs of camping, no plastic bottles, no modern lighters, nothing. I rose, flashlight tracing the fire ring, a scattering of burned matches, no traces of comestibles or leftover food. It looked abandoned for decades. Then I heard the moan again, directly below, echoing from the dry riverbed. It sounded so near I felt the breath of it. My heart stuttered. I trained my light downward. The riverbed was 2 feet below, littered with boulders and leaf litter. Shadows seemed to shift on their own. Another moan, pulling upward as if beckoning me deeper. I peered into the darkness, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape hunched under an overhanging rock, limbs draped long, head pressed into knees. I exhaled, conjuring deer or raccoon, but this shape looked wrong. Thin, almost skeletal, crouched unnaturally low. I took a step closer, trying to see the face, but the shape disappeared like a mirage. The moan died down. I jostled my radio, dispatch Lynn. Possible person or entity below campsite 5. No visible campers. I saw a humanoid crouched under a rock, but when I focused, it vanished. Over. The reply took longer. Copy Lynn. Consider returning to base and regrouping. Enhanced backup has been notified. Over. The tone was grave, like they weren't sure I should stay out there alone. But I was already committed. I adjusted the flashlight to high beam and descended the ledge, every step a cautious pick through loose stone. The moan returned, a faint echo, as though someone or something was trailing me. Each eve felt drawn out, each longer than the last, as if stretching reality. I reached the riverbed at 7:43 p.m., scanning for footprints or recent fires. All I saw was leaf litter, a few scuffed stones. No signs of life. I felt breath on the back of my neck and spun, brandishing my flashlight like a weapon. Nothing, only the gaping gloom. The sound came again, right beside me, so close I could have reached out and touched whoever made it, but when I swung around, the spot was empty. My steps faltered. I trudged forward, clambering over boulders. A burst of static erupted in my earpiece, dispatch returning. I straightened out the tangled cords. Lynn, we're deploying Ranger Chin to assist. He's 5 minutes out. Stand by in place. Over. I fought back panic, dropping my headlamp to my belt's red mode. My chest tightened. Copy dispatch. Standing by. Over. As soon as I balanced on a stable boulder, my foot slipped on loose scree, and I tumbled to my left, scraping my forearm across jagged shale. Pain exploded in my elbow. I bit back a scream, yanking my arm free of the sharp stone. Blood welled in a thin line. I cringed, but kept my grip on the flashlight. My knee hit a smaller rock below. I exhaled hot air, the sting of impact flaring. The hum, or was it the moan, returned, so close I felt it in my rib cage. The sound stretched, condensing a chorus of layered echoes. I scrambled to my feet, scanning frantically in every direction. Boulders, ferns, dense shadow. Where was I? How to stand my ground? If this was a missing hiker, I needed to find them, or at least ensure they were safe. But rational thought jostled with dread. Maybe there was no person. Maybe it was something else. At that moment, I saw movement, a figure slithering behind a rock 14 feet away. I raised my flashlight, illuminating a gaunt silhouette with limbs that didn't bend normally. A memorized shape, long-limbed watcher. My blood went cold. It crouched behind a basalt outcrop, head swiveling, empty eye sockets reflecting back my beam. I froze, fumbling for the radio's push to talk. My voice caught in my throat. The watcher rose, revealing its full length, nearly 8 feet tall, its elbows resting near its knees, twisted legs bent backward at the knee. Each step it took seemed to pull on cords I could feel in my skull. It lifted one hand, curved fingers hovering. It beckoned, as though inviting me to follow. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, then forced them open. A drop of blood trickled down my forearm, hot and urgent in the cooling night air. My training fought fear. Stay calm. Observe. Document. Report. I pressed the mic. Dispatch. This is Lynn. Confirm positive sighting of humanoid upland of campsite 5, arched limbs, elongated joints, 15 feet north. Approaching. The radio fizzled to static. Dead. Again. Thrown out by whatever wavelength the watcher emanated. I swallowed. My goal shifted. Retreat, regroup, get back up. I pivoted to ascend back to the ledge, but my path was blocked by a massive boulder. The watcher had moved in front of it, silent as a shadow, head tilting. I could not outmaneuver it. Instinct propelled my sprint to the left. My knee found a narrow crevice between rocks. My headlamp cracked on top of a boulder. Shards of light danced on rock faces as I tumbled downward, landing hard against wet shale. Pain radiated from my hip, shooting up my spine. I groaned, pressing my face into the cold stone. The watcher dropped from the boulder's lip, graceful as a spider. It landed a foot away, eyes dulled, as though assessing prey. I forced my vision up. In its maw, I saw a curling row of thin porcelain teeth sharp as shards of broken shell. It tilted its head, emitting a series of guttural reverberations, like wind churning through a beaten drum, layering harmonic. Each vibration felt like ice shards embedding in my lungs. I clutched my side, fighting panic. In my backpack's side pouch, I felt the grip of my canister of bear spray. My fingers closed around it. Adrenaline rose, pushing pain aside. I steadied my aim, knelt on the slippery shale, back against the boulder. The watcher shuffled closer, head tilting, limbs folding and unfolding. I squeezed the trigger on the spray. A mist of capsaicin hung in the air. The watcher hissed, recoiling, black ichor bubbling when the mist struck its skin. It croaked, a sound like nails on slate, then lunged. Every fiber screamed run, yet I stayed rooted. At the last instant, I fired again, spraying directly at its face. The mist hid its wide-open maw. Its teeth snapped shut, tangled in the cloud. It staggered, coughing that cracked whistle, then turned and fled into the darkness of the creek bed. My breathing came ragged. My hip burned, bone likely bruised. I pressed a hand to my radio. My words tumbled. Dispatch. Bear spray. Effective. Watcher retreated into darkness. I injured but mobile. Request immediate extraction, medical assistance, and backup now. Static. I pounded the radio. Nothing. Dead battery again. I cursed, dropping the canister back into my pouch. I gulped air, blinking back tears. My headlamp flickered to full white. With its beam, I scanned the creek bed. Nothing but ferns and slick stones. The watcher was gone. The whale, too, dissipated. Yet I felt it still, an absence that rattled my mind. I slid with effort up the embankment toward the ledge. My hip protested, but I forced each step. When I finally reached the clearing at 7:53 p.m., my mind reeled with incredulity. This was beyond protocol. This was beyond life. Who or what was the watcher? An echo of the missing family? A residual spirit? Some shape-shifting horror that preyed on campers? I had to survive long enough to find out. I forced myself to steady against a tree. My headlamp caught an encrusted envelope pinned to a sapling trunk. Scrawled in black, "Avoid the canyon's pulse, Ranger." My breath caught. I bent to retrieve it, pressing it into my pocket. My ears still rang with the watcher's cry. In that empty hollow, I felt utterly alone. When boot prints crumpled beneath my boots, I paused, hoping to make sense of their direction. They were faint, muddy, and incomplete, leading away from Campsite 5 toward the main trail. That meant the watcher might be heading toward the main loop, perhaps to Ravenwood Campsite. If I wanted to protect unsuspecting hikers, I had to warn them, and then stop the watcher if possible. At 8:02 p.m., I reached a bend where the creek crossed the main trail. Wet-crossed planks tipped with moss, a rusted trail marker pointing east of the Ravenwood Campsite side entrance. I scanned the trail. No yellow tape, no reflective markers. Just darkness. My headlamp's beam picked up two small footprints, bare swirling patterns, circled once and disappeared into ferns. My fingers clenched. The watcher's calling card, left behind. I traced the prints carefully with my gloved fingertip. The swirl pattern etched into fine mud, like an irrepressible signature. I snapped a photo for evidence, then pocketed my phone to conserve battery. Moonlight was scant here. Clouds scud above, making stars waver. I realized I was standing mid-trail. Any hiker approaching from the main access road might walk right into danger. I had to hurry. I advanced east, keeping my ears straining for any sign of the watcher, wailed drum echo. Instead, all I heard was dry leaves shifting. My fist tightened around a pistol at my belt, loaded with CM-46 beanbag rounds, my last offensive option. At 8:10 p.m., my night patrol light caught the corner of a pale shape near Ravenwood Campsite's entrance gates. Indeed, the cage-like hanging gates, twisted vines forming a grotesque arch. And perched on the lower rail, the watcher sat hunched, a king surveying potential prey. Its knees bent so low its palms nearly grazed the ground. It canted its head at me in recognition, as though it had anticipated my arrival. I edged forward, footsteps shallow, every nerve flaring. "Listen," I hissed, my voice low. "Leave this place. You've caused enough harm." My tone was steady, but my heart pounded, each beat echoing in my ears. The watcher stood, rising so slowly its elongated limbs creaked like broken wood. When it reached full height, it towered above me, head brushing against a low oak branch. It spoke, voice a monstrous dirge. "Gone again," but the echoes remain. Each word reverberated, as though blasted through a tunnel. My vision fragmented, a swell of nausea rising. I took a step back, my boots slipping on wet gravel. "Echoes? What echoes?" I demanded, pressing my flashlight forward. "You've hurt innocent people. You've terrorized children. I'm stopping you now." The watcher let out a laugh that rippled like shattered glass. It raised its arms, its bony thumbs brushing its chest in a mocking gesture. "None are safe, all a part of the echo." Its grin spread, revealing that jagged row of porcelain teeth. The watcher bent at the waist, leaning toward me. The moonlight flicked across its skull, thin, translucent cap of flesh covering bone. I saw veins, black, roiling beneath pale skin. Time slowed. I could see the watcher's mouth open slow, as if preparing to swallow my very soul. I squeezed my pistol, preparing to fire beanbag rounds into its chest, aiming to halt its advance. I steadied my breathing, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, but something shattered the moment, a distant, high-pitched cry that cut through the hollow. I snapped my head to the right. Flashlights bobbed in the trees. Ranger Chin and Ranger Alvarez dispatched from base to assist. At their approach, the watcher hesitated, looking down the trail as though sensing new challengers. I seized the moment. I fired both beanbag rounds in quick succession, sending them slamming into its forms. The watcher recoiled, dropping back into a crouch. Chen and Alvarez exploded from the trees, Chen wielding a shotgun with deterrent loads, Alvarez with a maglite and tranquilizer darts. We converged on the watcher, names on our lips. Double take. Hold stable. Engage the flank. As I approached the watcher, I noticed its legs quivered, tremors moving up its spine, its flesh quivering like silvered oil. When it lunged, both Chen and Alvarez fired, one with rubber slugs, one with 2 tranquilizer darts. The slugs hit with a thwack, rubber discs flattening across Iker's slick skin, sending black ichor sparks hissing. The darts struck its shoulder and thigh, 2 white cylinders sinking into flesh. The watcher's eyes rolled back. It stumbled, staggering in place. Its legs collapsed. It tumbled sideways against an oak with a sickening thud. It lay still for a heartbeat, then vomited a fountain of ichor that swallowed the ground beneath, steamy plumes rising. Alvarez aimed his maglite at the watcher's face and hit it with a high-beam blast, momentarily illuminating every bone filigree through its thin skin. The watcher lashed out, swiping at the beam, but its arms were heavy now, dripping with tarry black fluid. Chan exhaled. Count of 10, she said. Trank should calm it. I raised my pistol to its chest for a final beanbag volley, only as backup to ensure it wouldn't surge again. At my last shot, a resonant crack echoed. The watcher's skull split lengthwise, the top half folding backward, exposing a brain that shimmered like quicksilver. Its head fell to the ground in two fractured halves. Its body, now entirely bone and ichor, stuttered, then dropped, merging with the forest floor into a smoking black pool that steamed in the moonlight. I dropped my pistol, feeling the ground quaver under my knees. We stepped back, breathing heavy. The watcher's remains, mangled bone shards, ichor puddles, sizzled, then dissipated, leaving behind a charred, ashen stain. The wail, once thunderous, faded into a distant echo. My ears rang. My legs felt weak. I exhaled, wiping sweat from my forehead. It had gone. Over. My voice was thick. Ranger Chen bowed her head. You did it, Lynn. Took 2 trank darts. Blood pressure's off the charts. We need medics at 8 Bay Ranger Station immediately. Alvarez nodded, checking his watch. It's 8:15 p.m. Let's call it in. He keyed his radio. Dispatch Alpha 3. Watcher neutralized at Ravenwood Loop entrance. Transpo needed for Ranger Lynn. Over. After confirmation, we left the campsite's clearing and headed back along the wooded path, careful to avoid any residual patches of ichor on boots. My mind drifted, exhausted. How many watchers had existed here over the decades? How many campers had vanished into the echo? And did ending one watcher silence the echoes, or merely dampen them? By 8:47 a.m., I was lying on a gurney in the Ranger Station's clinic, Ranger Santos administering 4 fluids and checking my vitals. My forearm wound was bandaged, my hip radiographs taken. No fracture, just a deep bruise. The pressure on my head lessened after a sedative, but persistent ringing held my thoughts prisoner. Dr. Franklin leaned over me, his face serious. Ranger Lynn, you're stable. You'll have some hefty bruising and may feel fatigued for a while, but you'll recover fully unless you develop any worsening headaches. He patted my wrist. For now, rest and let us handle paperwork. I nodded, too weary to speak. Santos handed me a cup of hot broth. Drink this. You look pale. I sipped slowly, the warmth soothing my insides. Over the past 12 hours, I got from skepticism to terror to one of the few humans to survive a direct watch of the Watcher. Dispatch relayed that satellite data showed no further sinister thermal signatures in the preserve. Nearby hikers reported no odd sightings. The forest had returned to normal rhythm, the crests of cicada cries, the splash of squirrels skittering on fallen logs. But I felt the echo lingering, like a tide that had receded but left debris on the sands of my mind. Ranger Santos slid a file across my lap. Documentation's underway. We got photographs of the Watcher's initial form, thermal imager frames, 8 Hz audio recordings, video captures from the cameras you and Chen installed. This goes straight into the park paranormal archives. She added, we'll have to brief the regional director this afternoon. He'll decide if we release a public statement. but know that we'll maintain Ranger Lynn's actions as classified until the board meets. I exhaled. I appreciate it. My voice was hoarse. I just want the preserve back to normal. No more echoes. Santos squared her shoulders. We'll see. But something we learned last night, the Watcher's essence was partially replicable. Medical team found traces of proteins in its ichor that match no known taxonomy. This might require some serious research. I felt a dull ache between my shoulder blades. We'll handle it. But for now, let me rest. She nodded, standing. Of course. We'll keep in 4 flowing and watch your vitals. I'll wake you in 4 hours. I drifted into a fitful sleep as the clinic lights dimmed. At 1:15 p.m., I sat bolt upright in the interview room, a small office lined with closed-circuit monitors showing static images of park roads and trailheads. Ranger Chen, still dressed in fatigues, sat beside me. Across the table sat Ranger Chief Everett and his lieutenant Rodriguez. A small recorder sat between us. Chief Everett cleared his throat. Ranger Lynn, you understand the gravity of last night's events. We appreciate your action and the risks you took. However, in the interest of transparency, we need a full statement, timeline, witness accounts, physical evidence collected. I exhaled and recounted the evening's events, from the first whale at Raven Camp 4 to the discovery of the scrap of paper at Ravenwood Campsite to my fall and injury at Campsite 5, culminating in the Watcher's neutralization with support from Chen and Alvarez. I spoke of the swirl footprints, the decaying note at Campsite 7, the Watcher's first ambush in the Creek Ravine, and finally the showdown at Ravenwood's entrance. At each mention, Rodriguez typed rapidly, his face expressionless. Chen added, the Watcher rose out of Creek Ravine after several beanbag shots, then retreated. We followed to Ravenwood entrance, where pointers and tranquilizers finished it. Chief Everett nodded gravely. All physical evidence, ichor samples, bone fragments, watch remains, have been cataloged and secured. Thank you, Rangers. This will be forwarded to Department of Ecology and Biological Sciences. We've scheduled a press release tomorrow at 9 a.m. with a partial disclosure. The final details will remain classified under Code 3 until further review. I exhaled, relieved, yet a knot of dread remained. Understood, sir. He nodded. Get some rest. Effective tomorrow, you're posted for routine day patrol. You deserve a break. I managed a weary smile. Thank you. That evening, September 15th at 9:30 p.m., I found myself once again at Ravenwood Loop, but this time I was not alone. Ranger Santos and Ranger Patel joined me for a final inspection. Under a gibbous moon, the forest's contours were softer, illuminated by pale silver light. My hip ached as I navigated the trail. We first checked Raven Cam for functioning. Next, I guided them past Euro Bridge, gap to the twisting corridor where Camp 5 once stood. Ranger Patel used a GPS to mark the precise site of the Watcher's remains. Shin had already collected samples, DNA swabs, bone shards, sealed in sterile containers. I felt a shiver as we approached the riverbed. Moonlight glinted on flat rock. No sign of watchers, no puddles of ichor. Everything looked normal. I stooped, brushed aside leaf debris, and located indentations in the muddy ground. The swirl footprints, still faint but visible, circling around the central boulder like a ritual's trace. Santos stepped forward, tapping the swirl pattern. Photograph this. Evidence of Watcher's presence. Patel snapped pictures. We left a small stack of survey markers here, 3 white flags marking each swirl. In case future hikers stumble upon this, I said, they'll know it's been documented. We moved on, checking the stretch of trail leading to Ravenwood campsite. Unlike last night, the table was empty, no scrap of paper. I scanned the picnic table. The note I'd found was gone, likely removed for classification. We passed the fire pit, cold, nothing lingering. Up the slope toward the entrance, I shone my light. No signs of watchers, no residual bone. Beneath moonlight, the gravel parking lot looked innocuous. As we turned to return to the station, the moonlight flickered. The clouds momentarily obscured it, plunging the forest into inky black. When the moon re-emerged, I saw it. A handful of swirl marks etched into the dirt near the gate, a cluster of prints swirling together. My chest tightened. Patrol had not been here since last night. These prints were fresh, pressed into soft earth. I swallowed, heart shifting. Santos's beam cut across the swirl. Lynn, did you leave these? I shook my head. I didn't put these here. I took out my phone, tapped notes, swirl prints, Ravenwood entrance, 9:32 p.m., September 15th. No other marks leading away. The swirl alone completed. Patel's eyes narrowed. So the watcher or another came back. I exhaled cold air. Or hid here waiting. Santos reached out, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. We'll handle it. For now, everyone out of the loop. Tomorrow we bring specialists. I nodded, reflexively glancing over my shoulder into the darkness beyond the gate. The loop lay silent, but the swirl patterns whispered, "It's not over." At 11:05 p.m., we convened at base for a debrief with Lieutenant Rodriguez. The swirl prints, moonlit resurgence, formed a chilling echo of last night. Rodriguez's face remained impassive, though his voice was low when he spoke. We've got 2 possibilities. Either remnants of Watcher ritual continue, or another Watcher has taken its place. Field samples will confirm. He tapped at his tablet, nodding at satellite images showing no unusual heat signatures of the site. Biologists will analyze ichor vestiges for residual DNA. Meanwhile, maintain constant night patrols for the next week. We'll also be deploying thermal drones to hover over Ravenwood Loop. Patel asked, how do we contain something that comes back? Rodriguez's steady gaze held ours. We don't know yet. If this is an ancient spirit bound to this preserve, we may need ritual specialists from the Pineview Band to perform cleansing rites. He exhaled. We'll initiate contact tomorrow. I felt a chill. Recall the Watcher's jagged maw and hollow eyes struck a knot in my gut. I squeezed my flashlight to make the beam dance across the table. I had never encountered anything like an ember of malevolence in my years of patrolling. Now I was faced with the reality that the Watcher had survived, or another had stood in for it. The preserve's assumptions about wildlife hazards were crumbling beneath me. Santos rose, rubbing her temples. I'm off patrol for tonight. My nerves can't handle another late-night excursion. She stepped away, leaving the three of us under the harsh fluorescent light. Patel and I exchanged a look. I shrugged wearily. I grabbed a sleeping bag, might post near the gate just tonight and rotate with Chen. We'll keep the swirl prints under observation. Rodriguez nodded. See you at 5 a.m. briefing. Stay safe. He dismissed us. I nodded, then left the station with Patel and headed to my truck. We parked at the lot and lay a pair of tarps on the ground near the gate. The swirl prints lay only yards away, like warnings brandished in silver white under moonlight. We unrolled our sleeping bags, closing our eyes. Our heads spun with dread. I awoke with a start just before 3 a.m., mind jarred by a low rumble. I opened my eyes. My breath formed a cloud in the chilly pre-dawn air. The moon had slipped behind thick clouds, and my flashlight showed Patel's curled frame a few feet away. The hush pressed in only the distant whip of wind high in the pines. Then I heard a whisper soft as exhaled breath. Lynn, my pulse spiked. I sat up, launching my beam toward the threshold. The swirl prints glowed pale in the lamplight, but between them, just beyond the circle, stood a pale figure, gaunt, long-limbed, its head tilted in that trademark angle. The Watcher, or a near-identical version, its knees bent awkwardly beneath ragged clothing, hair matted with dew. It was eerily still, watching me as though curious. My hands trembled. I reached for the pistol in my belt. My heart pounded so hard I feared it would break my ribs. Who are you? I croaked, voice cracking. The figure turned its head, revealing empty eye sockets reflecting only darkness. Its lips peeled back in a grin of bone. I could feel bile bubble in my mouth. The Watcher took a step forward, each limb folding like a jagged origami framework. Echoes remain. It whispered, voice like splintered glass. Patel stirred, sensing something amiss. I raised a shaking finger, pointing at the Watcher. But before Patel could blink, the Watcher's form blurred, its bones collapsing inward, limbs folding into itself like collapsing shadow. With a low ripple, it vanished into the earth. No drop of ichor, no dust, no trace, only that final whispered echo hanging in the air. Echoes remain. My knees buckled. I exhaled a pain breath. The echo, a murmured, tears stinging. Patel sat up, alarmed. Lynn? What? I shook my head, still in shock. It was here, just a moment ago. Patel's voice remained calm. Show me. I pointed toward the swirl prints. They were now smudged, footprints between them as though something had stepped there and faded. We stared at the disturbed earth. No footprints leading away, no sign of drag marks, only a circle of churned soil. I turned to Patel. We need sunrise. We can't stay out here. We have to alert them. He nodded, guiding me back to my sleeping bag, as though tucking me into a fragile cocoon. By first light, 6:15 a.m., I stumbled into the debrief room, coffee pressed into my hand, bandages on my hips swollen. Santos and Chin were already there. Chief Everett's face, previously stoic, now looked drawn. He motioned me to a seat near the window. Dawn light filtered through blinds, painting the room in warm gold. He started without preamble. Ranger Lynn, Patel's report indicates multiple reappearances of swirl prints and recent witness accounts, 2 watchers cited. He paused, leaning forward. You saw one last night this morning, despite neutralizing one previously. Do you think a second watcher has arisen? Or that the watcher's essence is dividing? Explain. My voice was low, trembling. I believe the watcher is fragmenting, an echo that persists. The original form was neutralized, but a remnant remained, an echo. It can manifest intermittently, once at Campsite 5, then at Ravenwood entrance, and again this morning near the gate. Everett exhaled. We suspected that. Our biologists found residual ichor that tested for unknown proteins, possible reanimation at subcellular level. The Watcher's essence seems to live on, using the echo footprints, ritual runes, to anchor itself. If we don't perform a proper ritualistic severance, it will continue to reappear. I felt my stomach knot. So, we need an exorcism, in a sense. A ceremony. His tone was solemn. I've contacted the Pineview Band's Council of Elders. Chief Moran has agreed to come and perform an ancestral cleansing. But their rites require full moonlight, September 16th tonight. You saw the Watchers. You know, they answer the call of the moon. We need to coordinate a safe area. He handed me a sheet map of Ravenwood Loop with 3 marked zones. Campsite 5, Ravenwood Entrance, Walnut Bottom, and a circle indicating Sacred Circle of Marai. I recognized the name. Marai Circle was an old pine grove on the preserve's eastern edge, near the abandoned ranger station. Historically, local tribes performed naming ceremonies and healing rites there. Chief Moran intended to reconsecrate it tonight, invoking ancestral guardians to bind the Watcher's essence. Shin added, we need to station teams at each zones until after the ritual to deter further manifestations. Santos spoke up, effective immediately. Preserve is closed to public. Rangers remain on 24-hour rotation. We'll escort Chief Moran and the council to Marai Circle at 10 p.m. The ritual lasts until 2 a.m. Afterwards, I want all swirl markings removed. Cover them with fresh soil and salt. Let's hope that severs the echo. Everett closed the file. Everyone clear? If not, speak now. I exhaled. Clear. That evening at 9:45 p.m., a fleet of backup vehicles escorted Chief Moran, 2 tribal council members, and 6 tribal elders from the ranger station to Marai Circle. Accompanying them, Ranger Chin, Ranger Patel, Ranger Avery, and me special duty on protective detail. We parked a quarter-mile away, lights extinguished, and hiked cross-country in silence to avoid alerting any watcher lurking nearby. Marai Circle lay beneath a shattered sky. The full moon peeked through an uneven scrim of clouds. The grove consisted of 7 ancient pines forming a near-perfect circle on a raised knoll. The ground beneath the canopy was soft with pine needles, littered with small quartz stones used in ceremonies. The elders positioned themselves at equidistant points, facing inward. Chief Moran, dressed in ceremonial robes woven with cedar bark and adorned with eagle feathers, stood at the center. He placed a carved wooden drum and a bowl of river water on a flat stone. The remainder of us formed a perimeter about 50 feet outside the pines. Each ranger held a flashlight, pointed downward, and a rifle rigged with non-lethal rounds. Shen had placed motion sensor cameras on tripods along 3 primary ingress lines, the trails leading to Campsite 5, Ravenwood Entrance, and Walnut Bottom. The entire circle had been dusted with salt and crushed quartz, forming a second protective ring. At 10:07 p.m., Chief Moran struck the drum once with a carved mallet. A resonant beat slipped through the night air, and I felt the ground beneath me throb once, softly, like a heart. The tribal elders began chanting in Lakota, a low, lilting call, invoking Iwiza, the guardian of echoes, Nisos, the spirit of rivers, Napi, the trickster's bane. The chant built gradually, layering tones that felt like petals of sound unfolding in concentric circles. I scanned the perimeter, the hush deepened. In the distance, I thought I heard a faint hum, a quivering note carried on the midnight breeze. I nudged Patel, nodding toward Campsite 5's direction. A sudden ripple of red light flickered on his thermal imager screen, 0.02 degrees Celsius above ambient. Barely a heat signature, but enough to register. We zoomed in. I saw a frail, elongated silhouette, arms long as tree limbs, stepping into the moonlight, stepping on soft pine straw, surveying the gathering. I swallowed hard. My heart tightened. I cared for the elders, but this watcher would not remain docile. In a sharp whisper, I hissed to Patel, "Contact Chin, watcher inbound from Campsite 5. Patel nodded, snapping the camera to record. Chief Moran's chanting built. Elders echoed, Hiwa. Yeah, the Lakota words for return, and indigenous drums pulsed like throbbing hearts. The watcher advanced, tall, spindly, its head tilting once. I aimed my flashlight at it. Golden beam flooded its face. Hollows where eyes should be, twisted grin of bone. It froze for a heartbeat, as though confused by the light. Then it tilted its head, its mouth opening to emit a warped, shrieking note. Echo? I saw the watcher's second form, a second watcher at the Ravenwood entrance, stepping into camera view, its limbs longer still. Moonlight sketched its silhouette. It raised one arm to its long face, as though tasting the air. At that moment, both watchers called out in unison, a single elongated note that crashed through the grove's edge like a wave. Heed the echoes. The elders' voices wavered. The drum's beat faltered. Chief Moran struck the drum 3 times, staccato. Boom, boom, boom. He thrust his arms aloft and began singing in a higher pitch. The sound formed a resonance that countered the watcher's cry, like 2 clashing tectonic plates of sound. I felt the air thicken. The salt and quartz in the circle glowed faintly, a shimmer of protective runes in the moonlight. The 2 watchers advanced further, one toward Campsite 5 corridor, one toward Ravenwood entrance, both their forms distorted by the drum's resonance. The watcher at Campsite 5 knelt, pressing its hand into the swirl marks now glowing scarlet. I reached into my jacket and removed the second scrap of paper, the one that had signified avoid the canyon's pulse, and held it toward the watcher. Its head snapped up, focusing on the note. Its voice rose in volume, a keening that rattled my ears. Chief Moran's chant turned ferocious. His voice soared at an octave above the rest. The drumming aligned with his voice, forging a piercing harmony. The watchers paused, as though caught between forces. The watcher at Campsite Five's knees shook. The watcher at Ravenwood Entrance's chest rippled. Then suddenly, the watchers both shrieked, an ear-splitting howl that felt like their bones fracturing, before their forms collapsed into flakes of black ichor and dust that spiraled upward, drawn into the sky like smoke on a wind. I felt the ground vibrate, and then stillness prevailed. The elders' chant eased. Chief Moran called out, "He Cape Wathenji." Echoes bound. Return to the river of time. His final drum's strike rolled deep, reverberating through the clearing. The watcher's remains, once steaming black ichor, had vanished. Only the swirl prints remained, but the shards of ichor had evaporated, leaving only dust. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady. Patel and Chen blocked Campsite 5 corridor, confirming no watchers emerged from the swirling dust rising into the moonlit sky. The air tasted fresher, moist earth rather than stale ichor. Chief Moran gestured to me. "Ranger Lin, the echo's chain is broken. You have been chosen by Wakey and Jiang Eagle to carry this duty forward. You must remember, where the echo sleeps, the watcher may still yearn to return. Only the wind of our prayers and the drum of our hearts can bind it forever." I felt tears sting my eyes, but was too drained to respond. My entire being burned with relief and wonder. Overnight, the watcher, an ancient echo, had been bound, cast back into the realms beyond our sight. The swirl prince, once tethered to its essence, now lay inert. At 4:02 a.m., just minutes before the official end of the ritual, our ranger team emerged from Marai Circle, exhausted, battered, but victorious. Ranger Santos waited with thermoses of hot tea. Chen Patel, Avery, and I swapped weary salutes. In the east, the sky rippled from obsidian to indigo to smoky lavender. A flock of thrushes took flight overhead, their calls pealing through the still air. Santos clinked my mug, to the watcher's final slumber. I raised my mug, voice husky. To the echoes dissolved. I drank deeply, the warmth steadied me. We reconvened at the ranger station at 6 a.m. for a field report to Chief Everett. He listened intently as we described the watcher's final manifestation and the elder's successful binding ritual. Chen handed him a USB drive containing the 8 Hz recordings, a melodic wail that spiked, then shattered as the watchers collapsed. He nodded gravely. "Well done, Rangers," he said when we finished. "But Chief Moran warns that if our hearts falter, or if we leave the swirl prints unguarded, the echoes might awaken again. We must maintain vigilance. I'm ordering a permanent watch rotation around midnight. You 4 will be leads. Understand?" We all nodded, knowing duty had not ended with the watcher's collapse. It had only changed. It is now 10 days later, September 24th, 8:45 p.m., and I stand at the threshold of Ravenwood Loop for a routine night patrol. The forest exhales its nocturnal whispers, crickets, tree frogs, distant owls. My gear is lighter, no longer weighed down by dread, but by resolve. Beyond that gate lies ground once haunted by echoes. Now it stands cleansed, if only for this moon cycle. I approach Ravenwood campsite, noting the picnic table is dusted with fresh pine needles. The note I'd found 10 days ago. They have moved on. Beware the echoes is gone. No swirl prints circle the fire pit. My headlamp beam reveals only the soft contours of ferns and the damp sheen of fallen leaves. I nod to myself. No watchers lurk here tonight. I cross Euro Bridge's single log, a minor ache in my left hip reminding me of the fall at Campsite 5. I glance south toward the abandoned maintenance shed, now secured with new boards and 3 no trespassing signs. Below, the creek is a solid ribbon of silver clear as glass. I step onto gravel, continuing to Campsite 5's old entrance. The swirl prints near the ledge have been covered with fresh soil and rock. I shone my headlamp across that spot earlier, nothing suspicious. Still, I pause, bend to brush some loose pine needles aside, and see 3 small quartz chips lying in a neat triangle on the soil's surface. A frown. They weren't there this afternoon. My pulse quickens. I swallow, recalling Chief Moran's words. Where the echo sleeps, vigilance remains. I squat, picking up 1 quartz chip, fine, translucent, cold in my palm. At its center, carved faintly, was the swirl motif. I exhaled. Lynn, I whispered, as though the watcher might materialize from the moistened earth to silence me. Stay vigilant. I pocketed the quartz chips and rose. The hum, or whatever residual remnant of Watcher's resonance, was gone. A hush more profound than midnight wind settled. My steps felt lighter as I returned to the main trail, heading back to Ravenwood entrance. Behind me, the campfire pit with its smooth ash-covered stones felt, in that moment, like a silent promise that I will remain watchful. Night deepened. Cicadas whispered in distance. My radio crackled to life. Dispatch Lynn. All clear. I nodded. Copy. End of shift. I stepped beyond the gate to patrol the rest of Ravenwood Loop on this crisp, breathing September night. The watcher's echoes may stir again, but for now, the forest's hush was my only companion, and I would stand guard, ever ready for the return of the echoes.